From a teen in Bridgetown singing cover songs to America's youngest self-made female billionaire, Rihanna Fenty didn't just chase hits, she changed the business model. After selling 250 million plus records and stacking Grammys, she made the decisive pivot from talent fees to ownership. With Fenty Beauty, launched 2017 with Louis Vuitton, she rewired prestige cosmetics around inclusivity, 40 foundation shades on day one, and Savage X Fenty turned lingerie into a mass luxury movement. By 2024, Forbes pegged her net worth at roughly $1.4 billion, driven mostly by her equity in Fenty Beauty and Savage X Fenty, with music, licensing, and real estate as the supporting cast. This is the blueprint of how she did it. Spot the underserved, build with elite partners, keep meaningful equity, and market with cultural gravity. We'll track the inflection points. Umbrella-era leverage, the A&T hiatus that became a beauty empire, the brief Louis Vuitton fashion house experiment, motherhood, and the Super Bowl 2022 power play, and the operating rules behind the brand, authenticity, inclusion, and ruthless focus on unit economics. We'll also look at the stakes and setbacks that sharpened her edge, from early industry pressures to pausing Fenty Maison, and why Barbados named her a national hero in 2021. If you want the real story of how Rihanna turned star power into durable assets, and what that teaches about building generational wealth, this is your episode. And if you want to hear how billionaires built their fortunes, subscribe, like, and turn on notifications. Welcome to Richie Rich Stories. The trade winds carried salt and secrets through the streets of St. Michael Parish, Barbados, on the day Rihanna Fenty entered the world. February 20th, 1988, a Sunday when the island swayed between the echoes of colonial past and the whispers of global future. Monica Fenty, an accountant with precise fingers and calculating eyes, held her daughter against the humid air as Ronald, her warehouse supervisor husband, paced the corridor with a mixture of pride and restlessness that would come to define him. "She has something in her eyes," Monica would tell her sister later that evening as the Caribbean sunset painted their zinc roof in shades of amber and gold. "Something that sees beyond Westbury Road." The Fenty household occupied a modest corner of Bridgetown, where working-class dreams found shelter beneath corrugated metal and resilience. By day, Monica navigated ledgers and balance sheets, transforming numbers into stability. By night, she crafted a home for her growing family. Robin first, then brothers, Rory and Rajat following in the years to come, alongside Ronald's children from previous relationships. Young Robin learned early to recognize the dual rhythms of her father, the steady drumbeat of his warehouse work, and the erratic cymbal crashes of his dependencies. Ronald's struggles with crack cocaine and alcohol cast long shadows across their home, turning ordinary evenings into exercises in emotional navigation. "Daddy's sick again," Monica would say on those nights when Ronald disappeared into his demons, teaching Robin a language of painful diplomacy. "We pray for him, but we keep moving." And they did keep moving. Monica's quiet fortitude became the bedrock upon which Robin built her earliest understanding of womanhood. At night, when arguments erupted like sudden tropical storms, Robin would retreat to the windowsill of her small bedroom, watching neighborhood dogs wander beneath streetlights while humming melodies that arrived uninvited in her mind. The Bridgetown of her childhood existed in vibrant contrast cruise ships docked at the harbor bringing pale tourists with cameras and wallets, while just streets away, local markets throbbed with the authentic pulse of island commerce. By age 12, Robin stood beside her mother at these market stalls on weekends, arranging colorful fabrics and learning the subtle dance of negotiation. "Watch their eyes," Monica instructed, as they set up their modest clothing display before the morning heat intensified. "Not their words. Eyes tell you what they're willing to pay." Robin absorbed these lessons with the same quiet intensity she brought to everything. Her hands learned to fold and display. Her voice found the lilting pattern of sales pitch in Bajan dialect, part English, part African rhythm, all persuasion. The stalls smelled of saltfish and overripe mangoes from neighboring vendors, mingling with the scent of fabric dye and the occasional waft of marijuana from dock workers passing by. $20 too much, a tourist couple argued once, examining a hand-decorated shirt. But look at the stitching, 12-year-old Robin responded, running her finger along the careful patterns. My mother did this herself. You won't find this on any other island. Her voice carried a confidence that belied her age, a natural understanding of value that extended beyond currency. The couple bought the shirt for $18, a victory that taught Robin that compromise could still be profitable if you understood your worth. At Charles F. Broome Memorial Primary, Robin moved through classes with quiet competence rather than academic brilliance. Her teachers noted her ability to observe, to absorb, to internalize, skills that served her better than mere memorization. During music classes, however, a different child emerged. Her voice carried melodies with an effortless richness that caused other students to fall silent. You could hear heaven in that child. Mrs. Beckles, her primary music teacher, would later tell local newspapers after her former student achieved international fame. Even at 9 years old, she sang with something ancient in her voice. The transition to Combermere High School coincided with a deepening complexity in Robin's home life. Ronald's struggles intensified, creating a household atmosphere that shifted between tense silence and explosive confrontation. At 14, Robin found structure in an unexpected place. The school's Army Cadet program, a vestige of British colonialism that instilled discipline through uniform precision and hierarchical respect. Stand straight, Fenty, the cadet captain would bark across the sun-baked parade ground. Eyes forward, shoulders back. In these formations, sweat trickling down her spine in the merciless Caribbean heat, Robin discovered a paradoxical comfort in rigid instruction. The chaos at home had no place here. Orders were clear, expectations transparent, results measurable. She excelled at taking direction, a skill that would prove invaluable years later in recording studios and business meetings. You adapt quickly, the captain noted during a uniform inspection, straightening her collar with crisp efficiency. That will serve you well. Evenings found her at home, often caring for her younger brothers when Monica worked late and Ronald was absent, physically or emotionally. She would prepare simple meals, guide homework, mediate squabbles between Rory and Richard with the steady hand of someone accustomed to navigating troubled waters. Rich always knew how to calm a storm, Rory would recall years later, even when she was just a girl herself. The kitchen table became her first stage for performance, entertaining her brothers with exaggerated impersonations of school teachers and television personalities. She developed a gift for mimicry, absorbing and reproducing the vocal inflections of Whitney Houston and Mariah Carey from the pirated cassette tapes that circulated through neighborhood. Hands. At 15, local pageants and school performances provided legitimate outlets for this growing performance instinct. While never classically beautiful by conventional standards, Robin possessed something more compelling. A visual audacity, an ability to transform herself through posture and presence that made judges and audiences take notice. She walks like she's already famous, one pageant coordinator whispered to another during a rehearsal, like she's waiting for the world to catch up. The late 1990s brought cable television to more Barbadian homes, including occasional access for the Fenty family. MTV beamed images of Destiny's Child, TLC, and the Spice Girls into their living room, women who controlled their image and message while dominating global pop culture. Robin absorbed these visuals with studious attention, noting the costumes, choreography, and most importantly, the business dynamics visible in music videos and interviews. They're not just singing, she observed to a school friend during lunch break. They're building something bigger than songs. Her friend nodded without fully understanding, more concerned with the immediate dramas of adolescent social politics than the business architecture of global pop. Monica recognized her daughter's growing musical obsession with cautious support. After one particularly difficult night when Ronald returned home in a destructive state, Monica found Robin singing softly to her brothers, creating an improvised lullaby that managed to calm the household despite the tension. You have a gift, Monica told her daughter later that night, as they washed dishes together in quiet solidarity. But gifts need protection and practice. She arranged for Robin to join a small church choir, where formal training could shape her natural talents. The choir director, Sister Martha, recognized immediately what she was working with. Not merely a good voice, but a distinctive one, textured and slightly rough in ways that conveyed emotion. Directly to the listener. Don't try to sound pretty, Sister Martha advised during rehearsals. Sound true. God hears truth before beauty. This permission to embrace authenticity rather than polish resonated deeply with Robin. Her voice developed not toward technical perfection but toward emotional impact, a sonic honesty that would eventually distinguish her from more technically accomplished peers. By 16, Robin had absorbed the full education of her childhood, her mother's quiet tenacity and business acumen, the rhythm and patois of market negotiation, the discipline of cadet formation, the emotional intelligence required to navigate her father's volatility, the visual curation learned through pageants, and the musical authenticity cultivated in choir stalls. These elements formed a foundation no formal education could have provided, a street-level masterclass in human psychology, value exchange, and artistic integrity. The zinc-roofed house on Westbury Road had become too small to contain what was growing inside her. I want to try, she told Monica one evening in 2002, after a small local performance had garnered unexpected attention. I need to see if this can become something real. Monica studied her daughter's face in the kitchen's fluorescent light, seeing both vulnerability and determination. She understood the statistical improbability of musical success, particularly from their corner of the Caribbean. But she also recognized something formidable in the young woman before her, something that transcended rational calculation. You'll need to work twice as hard as everyone else, Monica said finally. Not because you're from here, but because that's what excellence demands. Robin nodded, absorbing the wisdom like rainfall on parched soil. And no matter what happens, Monica continued, you remember who you are and where you come from. Money changes circumstances, not character. Neither mother nor daughter could have predicted how prophetic this kitchen table conversation would prove to be, nor how the lessons of Westbury Road pricing clothes at market stalls, calming brothers during family storms, standing at attention under the Caribbean sun, were quietly preparing Rihanna Fenty for a future that would transform global industries. For now, she was simply a 16-year-old girl on a small island, looking beyond the horizon with quiet certainty that something awaited her, something that would require everything she had, learned in the crucible of her childhood, and more that she had yet to discover. The trade winds continued their ancient journey across Barbados, carrying salt, secrets, and the yet unwritten songs of a girl who would one day be known simply as Rihanna, a name that would eventually transcend music to become shorthand for entrepreneurial vision and cultural transformation. But those chapters remained unwritten, existing only as possibility in the determined gaze of a teenager standing at her bedroom window, watching cruise ships disappear into the night, carrying visitors back to the wider world she somehow knew would one day be hers. The sun-drenched shores of Barbados seemed worlds away from the grey Manhattan skyline. Rihanna Fenty stood at the window of the cramped recording studio, 16 years old, and gazing out at a city that never seemed to sleep. 3 songs lay finished behind her, captured on demo tracks that producer Evan Rogers believed might change her life forever. You've got something special, Rogers had told her when they first met in 2003 at a mutual friend's home back in Barbados, something that could take you far beyond the island. The studio air hung heavy with possibility, and the lingering scent of coffee gone cold. Outside, New York City continued its relentless pace, yellow cabs streaming down rain-slicked streets, pedestrians hurrying with purposeful determination, the constant symphony of horns and voices rising from the concrete below. Monica Fenty placed a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. You're quiet tonight. What's on your mind? Rihanna turned from the window. In her mother's eyes, she saw both worry and pride, the complex emotions of a woman who had accompanied her teenage daughter across the ocean, away from the familiar rhythms of home to this sprawling metropolis of steel and ambition. Just thinking about school, Rihanna said softly, about what happens next. The question of education had been hovering between them for months. With each trip to New York, with each session in the studio, the path forward was taking shape, a divergence from the traditional route her classmates would follow. The choice weighed on her, not with regret but with the gravity of recognition. Some doors, once closed, would remain so. Whatever you decide, her mother said, we'll find a way to make it work. The studio door opened, and Evan Rogers entered with a stack of papers and a tentative smile. Good news, he announced. The demo is getting attention. Behind him, the sound engineer adjusted levels on the mixing board, the electronic glow of the equipment casting shadows across his face. The 3 songs they had recorded represented more than just music. They were an introduction, a business card, a statement of intent. In them, Rihanna had blended the Caribbean rhythms of her upbringing with contemporary pop sensibilities, creating something that felt both familiar and fresh. There are a few labels interested in hearing more, Rogers continued. This could be the beginning. Later that night, in the modest hotel room they shared, Rihanna sat cross-legged on the bed while her mother carefully reviewed the day's paperwork. Outside their window, the city glowed with artificial light, buildings illuminated against the darkness like constellations of human making. These contracts, Monica said, her accountant's mind scrutinizing the fine print. There's language here about percentages, about management fees. We should understand every word before you sign anything. Rihanna nodded, grateful for her mother's protective instincts. Even at 16, she recognized the value of clarity, of knowing exactly what one was agreeing to. The music industry was littered with cautionary tales of young talent exploited through the fine print of agreements they hadn't fully comprehended. Evan's been good to us, Rihanna observed, but this is business. Everything is business, her mother replied, even kindness sometimes. The following morning brought another round of meetings, this time in a sleek office building where platinum records hung in frames along the corridor. A&R executives in expensive casual wear listened to the demos, their expressions carefully neutral, until the final notes faded. The Caribbean influence is strong, one of them noted. That could be your angle. Sean Paul is charting right now with Get Busy, there's a market opening up. Rihanna absorbed their feedback without betraying her thoughts. She was learning quickly about song selection, about positioning, about the delicate dance between authenticity and commercial appeal. She recognized the unspoken calculus behind their assessments. What would sell? What would differentiate her? What would justify their investment? I'm ready to work, she told them simply. Back in Barbados, weeks later, Rihanna stood on the beach near her Westbury Road home, watching the waves roll in with hypnotic regularity. The island felt simultaneously smaller than before and more precious, a known quantity in a life that was accelerating toward uncertainty. Her friend Melissa approached, kicking sand as she walked. Heard you're becoming famous, she teased. Rihanna laughed, the sound carrying on the ocean breeze. Not famous, just busy. The girl who sang at school assembly, now recording in New York. Melissa shook her head in wonder. Are you nervous? The question lingered between them as they watched a catamaran sail past, white against the azure horizon. Rihanna considered it honestly, searching her feelings for the truth. Not nervous, she finally said. I've been preparing for this, even when I didn't know I was preparing. The cadet training taught me discipline. Singing taught me to listen to criticism without taking it personally. I'm ready to learn whatever comes next. What came next was another trip to New York, another round of studio sessions. This time, they worked in a different space, smaller, less polished, but with a producer who specialized in rhythm sections that made the speakers vibrate with energy. The labels want to hear range, Rogers explained as they selected tracks for the expanded demo. They need to know you can handle different styles, different tempos. In the booth, headphones pressed against her ears, Rihanna closed her eyes and found the melody. The voice that emerged was hers, but somehow more amplified, not just by the microphones and mixing board, but by intention, by the growing certainty that this path, however uncertain, was the one she was meant to follow. Between sessions, Rogers arranged small showcases, intimate performances where Rihanna could develop her stage presence away from the scrutiny of larger audiences. In hotel conference rooms and small venues, she practiced the transition from recording artist to performer, learning how to connect with strangers through eye contact and movement. When you're on stage, an industry veteran advised her after one such performance, "You're telling a story with more than your voice. Your body language, your expression, it all matters." One evening, as autumn painted Manhattan with golden light, Rogers met with Rihanna and her mother at a small restaurant near Times Square. The tourist crowd surged past the windows, digital billboards flickered overhead, and the constant pulse of the city provided a backdrop to their conversation. "I've been speaking with some contacts at Def Jam," Rogers said, his voice measured. "There might be an opportunity for an audition. Jay-Z is involved in their A&R now. This could be significant." Monica's eyes narrowed slightly. What would this mean, practically speaking? "It would mean a decision," Rogers replied, looking at Rihanna. "About school, about where you live, about committing fully to this path." Rihanna sipped her water, allowing herself a moment to consider. At 16, the prospect of relocating permanently, of leaving behind the structured world of education for the uncertain terrain of entertainment, should have terrified her. Instead, she felt a curious calm, the quiet recognition of arriving at a threshold she had always been destined to cross. "If this is happening," she said, "I need to understand everything. The business side, not just the music. If I'm the product, I should understand the product." Her mother nodded with approval. "That's my daughter, always thinking ahead." Later that week, Rogers arranged a meeting with an entertainment attorney who specialized in working with new artists. In an office lined with law books and framed concert memorabilia, he explained the fundamentals of recording contracts, publishing rights, and the labyrinthine pathways through which music generated revenue. "Most artists focus only on the advance," the lawyer explained. "That's a mistake. The terms of recoupment, the mechanical royalties, the controlled composition clauses, these determine your financial future long after the advance is spent." Rihanna leaned forward, absorbing the information with intense focus. The vocabulary was new, but the concepts resonated with something fundamental in her approach. Look beyond the immediate, understand the system, protect your position. "The industry is in flux right now," the lawyer continued. "Napster shook everything up, and iTunes is changing the game again. Physical album sales are declining. Tour revenue and merchandise are becoming more important than ever." As autumn deepened toward winter, Rihanna's conversations with Rogers began to strain under the weight of business realities. What had begun as a mentorship was evolving into management, with all the associated complications of percentages and expectations. "The standard rate is 15%, Rogers explained during a tense discussion in the studio's break room. "That's industry standard for what I'm providing. Connections, guidance, studio time, development." Monica's expression remained neutral, but her voice carried an edge of steel. "And if larger labels become involved, if other management opportunities present themselves?" The air between them thickened with unspoken calculations. Rihanna observed the exchange with quiet intensity, recognizing it as her first real education in how the business operated, how relationships formed in good faith could fracture along the fault lines of financial interest. "We should have this in writing," Rihanna suggested, "for clarity." By December, with Christmas approaching, Rihanna returned to Barbados with more than gifts in her luggage. She carried decisions, possibilities, and the growing weight of professional identity. Her classmates were preparing for examinations and university applications. She was preparing for a different kind of evaluation. "The Def Jam audition is scheduled for January," Rogers told her before she left New York. "We'll need to be ready." At home, the familiar sounds and scents of Barbados embraced her. The rhythm of Creole conversation, the aroma of her grandmother's cooking, the constant whisper of ocean breezes through palm. "Ooh, Franz." She found herself recording these sensory memories, storing them away like treasures that might sustain her through whatever lay ahead. Her father, Ronald Fenty, visited one afternoon, his proud smile tinged with the regret of past absences. Their relationship had weathered his struggles with addiction, finding a fragile equilibrium of care and caution. "New York treating you well?" he asked, watching her arrange photographs on her bedroom shelf. "It's different," she answered. "Faster, colder, but exciting. Your mother tells me you might be moving there, for good." Rihanna nodded, allowing the full implications of that possibility to settle between them. At 16, almost 17 now, the prospect of permanent relocation meant more than a change of scenery. It meant stepping fully into adulthood, with no safety net beyond her own determination and her mother's watchful support. "I might," she confirmed, "if things go the way we hope." "You always were meant for more than the island could give you," her father said softly. "Just don't forget where you come from." As 2003 gave way to 2004, Rihanna stood at the cusp of transformation. The demos she'd recorded in New York were circulating among industry insiders. The feedback was promising but measured. Potential recognized but not yet fully realized. The path forward would require more than talent. It would demand strategic patience, careful listening, and the courage to seize opportunities when they appeared. On her final night in Barbados before returning to New York, Rihanna walked along the beach at sunset, the sand cool beneath her feet, the horizon painted in shades of orange and purple. The Caribbean stretched before her, vast and familiar, a constant she was preparing to exchange for variables. She thought about the conversations with Rogers about market positioning, about the Caribbean influence that made her sound distinctive in an American context. She thought about the early lessons in contract negotiations, about percentages and rights and the value of clarity. She thought about the showcase performances, about finding her voice not just as a singer but as a presence. The ocean waves rolled in with steady rhythm, a natural cadence that had provided the backdrop to her entire life. Soon, that soundtrack would be replaced by subway rumbles and taxi horns, by the electronic pulse of studio equipment and the murmured assessments of industry gatekeepers. Rihanna took a deep breath of salt-laden air, filling her lungs with home. Whatever came next, record deals or disappointments, fame or further development, she would carry this moment with her, the girl from Westbury Road, standing at the edge of possibility, ready to step forward without a backward glance. The February sky over Manhattan hung like tarnished silver, pressing down on the sleek glass towers with a weight that matched Rihanna's expectations. She stood before the imposing entrance of Def Jam Recordings, 16 years old, the taste of Barbadian sea salt still lingering in her memory as she breathed in the cold American air. "This is it," her mother whispered beside her, squeezing her hand. "Remember what we came for." Robin Rihanna Fenty nodded, her breath forming small clouds that dissipated in the winter chill. She had rehearsed for this moment countless times in her small bedroom back home. Now, standing before the gleaming doors of 82 and 5/8 Avenue, she felt a curious calmness settle over her, the tranquility that comes when there is no path backward, only forward. The elevator ascended smoothly through the building, each floor representing another step away from the life she had known. When the doors opened onto the Def Jam floor, she was met with walls adorned with platinum records that caught the light, throwing reflections across her face like premonitions. "Mr. Reed and Mr. Carter will see you now," said an assistant with practiced indifference. The corner office where her audition would take place overlooked a Manhattan that seemed built of equal parts ambition and indifference. L.A. Reid sat behind a vast desk, his expression measured, revealing nothing. Beside him stood Jay-Z Sean Carter, the newly appointed president of Def Jam, watching her with eyes that missed nothing. "So," said Reid, his voice filling the room without effort, "show us what you've brought from Barbados." She began with Pon de Replay, her voice finding its way through the melody that had carried her across the ocean. The Caribbean rhythms felt suddenly foreign in this glass and steel environment, but she let the music pull her back to familiar ground. As the final note hung in the air, she seamlessly transitioned to Whitney Houston's For the Love of You, allowing the ballad to showcase the depth she possessed beyond dance tracks. When silence returned to the room, Jay-Z exchanged a glance with Reid. "Wait here," he said, and both men left. Hours passed. Outside, the winter day surrendered to early darkness. Assistants came and went with contracts, discussions, phone calls. Her mother sat beside her, occasionally squeezing her hand, neither of them fully comprehending the machinery that had been set in motion. "We're offering you a 6-album deal," Reed finally said upon returning. "We want to sign you today." The contract before her represented more money than she had ever seen, an advance rumored later to be around $250,000. Her hands didn't tremble as she signed, though perhaps they should have. At 16, on a February afternoon, Rihanna Fenty became the property of Def Jam Recordings for 6 albums, her talent commodified in neat legal paragraphs on cream-colored paper. "Welcome to the family," Jay-Z said, his handshake firm, his gaze evaluating. Outside, night had claimed Manhattan, the city's lights fighting back against the darkness. In the car taking them back to their temporary accommodations, her mother finally spoke. "Do you understand what just happened?" Rihanna nodded, watching the city slide past the window. "Everything changes now." The months that followed unfolded with the relentless precision of a metronome. Studio sessions stretched into the early morning hours. Her voice, recorded and re-recorded, became a tool to be shaped and polished. Producers argued over beats and bridges while she absorbed everything, learning the language of an industry that transformed art into product. May brought the completion of Music of the Sun, her debut album. In the control room, she listened to the final mix of Ponder Replay, the single that would introduce her to the world. "It's good," Jay-Z said, standing behind her with arms crossed. "It'll hit." "How high?" she asked, still learning to speak the language of charts and numbers. "High enough to matter." August arrived with a heat that reminded her of home. Ponder Replay climbed the Billboard Hot 100, settling at number 2, kept from the summit only by Mariah Carey's We Belong Together. The morning she saw the chart position, she stood in her small apartment, the paper trembling slightly in her hands. Her first meaningful check arrived soon after, a combination of her advance and initial royalties that represented more money than her family had seen in years. Without hesitation, she knew what the first portion would purchase. "I want to buy a house," she told her mother over a phone call that bridged New York and Barbados. "For you, back home." The property in Bridgetown wasn't extravagant, a modest concrete home with enough space for her mother to breathe easier than she ever had. The $50,000 it cost represented half of her first earnings, a ratio of obligation to self that would remain consistent even as the numbers grew larger. Her mother moved to the States to stay with her for the first 6 months of her new life. Together, they navigated the landscape of American celebrity, the endless interviews, the photo shoots where stylists treated her like clay to be molded, the radio appearances where she learned to speak in sound bites. "They're building you," her mother observed one evening as they returned from a grueling day of promotion. Rihanna stood before the mirror in their shared apartment, studying the person being created. "No," she corrected quietly, "they're trying to. There's a difference." The attorney she was assigned taught her the first vocabulary of her new existence: recoupable expenses, points on royalties, publishing rights. She listened intently, storing information like ammunition, aware that knowledge was the only defense in an industry built on asymmetry. "Always read what you sign," an older lawyer told her after a particularly dense contract review, "even when you're tired, especially when you're tired." She worked 18-hour days, learning that success was constructed from equal parts talent and endurance. In recording booths and dance studios, she built calluses on her spirit to match those forming on her feet. When executives spoke about her brand in meetings, she was learning to hear the term not as an imposition, but as a space she could eventually control. During a rare moment of stillness, she stood at the window of the studio where they were finishing touches on her album. Below, Manhattan continued its perpetual motion, indifferent to her presence. "You need to think about what you want to be known for," a marketing executive had told her earlier that day. "What makes Rihanna different?" As if in answer, she began referring to her growing fan base as the Navy, a nod to her country's naval tradition and a subtle claim to command. It was a small assertion of identity, the first of many decisions that would gradually shift the balance between product and creator. In September, as autumn began painting Central Park in shades of amber and crimson, she sat across from Jay-Z in a quiet corner of an upscale restaurant. Between them, numbers outlined the economics of her first tour, a supporting slot opening for a more established act. These guarantees are standard, he explained, indicating the per-show payment structure, but standard doesn't always mean right. She studied the figures, remembering the calculations her mother used to make at their kitchen table in Barbados, stretching meager paychecks across impossible distances. "I want more," she said simply, surprising herself with the directness. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Good, that's the right answer. But you have to earn more first." "I will," she replied, the words carrying the weight of prophecy. As winter approached, bringing the year full circle, she found herself once again in the Def Jam offices where it had all begun. The building was decorated for the holidays, but the festive atmosphere did little to soften the corporate edges. The first album performed exactly as expected, L.A. Reid told her, reviewing sales figures. Music of the Sun had moved respectable numbers, not a blockbuster, but enough to justify their investment. "Now we build on the foundation." She nodded, already understanding that in this world, each achievement was merely prologue to greater expectations. The 16-year-old girl who had walked through these doors in February had been replaced by someone who now recognized the machinery surrounding her, who was beginning to see how its gears might be adjusted. That evening, alone in her apartment with the Manhattan skyline glittering beyond her window, she called home. The house she had purchased for her mother stood as tangible proof of transformation, a concrete manifestation of promises kept. "Are you happy?" her mother asked, the connection slightly blurred by distance. Rihanna considered the question, watching her reflection in the window glass, superimposed over the city lights. "I'm learning," she answered finally. The year that had begun in a Def Jam corner office was ending with her name known to millions. The path from Westbury Road to here had been traversed in a single, impossible leap. She understood now that signing the contract had been the easiest part, the beginning, not the destination. In the quiet of her apartment, she played the rough cuts of songs being considered for her second album. Tomorrow would bring more studios, more meetings, more decisions that would shape the next phase. The industry measured success in units and digits, but she was beginning to develop her own metrics: autonomy, control, the gradual accumulation of leverage. Outside, snow began to fall on Manhattan, covering the city in a momentary stillness. She watched the flakes drift past her window, each one following its own path downward, yet part of the same inevitable descent. There was a pattern there, she thought, a lesson about individuality within systems, about finding space for oneself inside structures built by others. The phone rang. Another executive, another decision requiring her attention. She answered, her voice steady, her mind already calculating moves on a board that stretched far beyond this moment, this year, this first tentative step into the empire she couldn't yet see, but somehow knew awaited her. Raindrops tapped against the sleek black limousine window as it glided through Manhattan's concrete canyons on a gray June morning in 2007. Inside, Rihanna traced a slender finger along the condensation, watching the city blur beyond the glass. 24 hours earlier, Billboard had confirmed what radio play already suggested. Umbrella had officially claimed the #1 spot on the Hot 100. The Barbadian singer leaned back against the leather seat, still processing the reality of her situation. The soft ping of her Motorola Razr interrupted her thoughts. Another congratulatory text, this one from her mother in Bridgetown. She smiled, remembering the call they'd shared last night, her mother's voice cracking with pride across the Atlantic. "You've earned this," Jay-Z had told her at the studio celebration. His normally stoic demeanor softened just enough to show genuine pride. "But remember, this isn't the destination, it's just the first real mile marker." The car slowed before the gleaming entrance of Def Jam's Manhattan headquarters. Rain drizzled around her as she stepped out, umbrella in hand. an irony not lost on the paparazzi who had begun gathering whenever she made public appearances. The metaphorical had become literal. The title of her breakthrough hits was now a constant prop in her visual narrative. Inside the building's sleek lobby, a security guard nodded with newfound recognition. 6 months ago, she'd still been signing in at the front desk. Now, doors opened before she reached them. "They're waiting for you in the conference room," her assistant mentioned, keeping pace as they traversed the corridor. "Full marketing team, plus L.A. Reid and Jay." Rihanna nodded, straightening her posture slightly. This wasn't just a celebration meeting. This was strategy. She'd learned to read the corporate semiotics of Def Jam. When both L.A. Reid and Jay-Z appeared in the same room, decisions with zeros attached were being made. The conference room fell silent as she entered. L.A. Reid, impeccable in his tailored suit, rose first. "There she is," he announced, gesturing toward her with theatrical flair. "The woman who's about to break the all-time record for weeks at #1 in the UK." Applause rippled through the room. 7 marketing executives, 2 A&R directors, Jay-Z, seated quietly at the far end, observing with measured intensity. "We're not just marking a moment," Reid continued as Rihanna took her seat. "We're discussing how to leverage this momentum. Umbrella isn't just a hit, it's a cultural phenomenon." The meeting progressed through marketing proposals, tour calendars, and international promotion strategies. Rihanna noticed how Jay-Z remained largely silent, interjecting only when the conversation veered toward creative decisions or deal structures. She had begun studying his business approach, recognizing the patterns in his interventions. "The tour guarantees have tripled since last month," noted the head of touring, sliding a document across the polished table. "We're looking at arena configurations in 14 major markets now, not just theaters." Rihanna glanced at the numbers, her expression betraying nothing of her internal calculation. The figure represented more money than she'd ever imagined making from music. But she recalled Jay-Z's quiet advice weeks earlier, delivered during a late-night studio session: "The road is where the real money lives. Records sell the tickets, tickets build the fortune." After the meeting dispersed, Jay-Z motioned for her to stay behind. They stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the rain-slicked streets below. For a moment, neither spoke, watching yellow taxis navigate the wet asphalt like luminous water insects. "You didn't mention the master's conversation," she finally said, her voice casual but direct. Jay nodded slowly. "Not the right forum, too many ears, not enough decision-makers." "When then?" "You've got leverage now," he replied, "but timing matters. The next contract negotiation is where you position ownership shares, not while everyone's celebrating Umbrella." "I don't want to just be the face, Jay," she said, turning from the window to meet his gaze. "Not long term." A ghost of a smile crossed his features. "I know. That's exactly why we're having this conversation." He paused. "Most artists never even think to ask about ownership until it's too late. They're too busy enjoying their first taste of success." "I'm enjoying it," she countered. "I'm just thinking beyond it too." "That's the difference," he said simply. Later that evening, Rihanna sat in the quiet solitude of the Beverly Hills guest house where she'd been staying during the Los Angeles portion of her promotional tour. The space belonged to Jay-Z and Beyoncé, a sanctuary of marble and understated wealth, far removed from the frenetic energy of hotel lobbies and their inevitable paparazzi encampments. She opened her laptop, navigating to her bank account. The numbers still felt surreal comma placements that would have been mathematical errors in her Barbadian childhood. The first million had arrived, split between tour advances, Umbrella royalties, and strategic appearances. She'd transferred a significant portion into savings, heeding financial advice that felt foreign but necessary. Her phone buzzed with an email from the director of her next video. Attached were concept boards showing dramatic visual proposals. Stark industrial imagery, high-contrast lighting, sculpted silhouettes. She studied them carefully, noting how the aesthetic aligned with the visual language she'd been developing since the Umbrella video. There was continuity building in her imagery, a visual signature that transcended individual songs. "What do you think?" Read the director's message. I like the contrast, she typed back, but let's diversify the casting more. I want a wider range of faces and bodies. She hesitated, then added, and I'd like approval on the final edit before it's delivered to the label. This request, increasingly common in her communications, reflected a growing understanding of how visuals translated to brand value. Every video, photo shoot, and album cover was building an asset that extended beyond music. She couldn't articulate the full scope of what she was constructing, but instinct told her these details mattered. The doorbell interrupted her thoughts. Through the security monitor, she recognized the silhouettes of her glam team, arriving for the Billboard cover shoot preparation scheduled for tomorrow. She buzzed them in, switching modes from business to creative collaborator. We brought options, announced her stylist, wheeling in a rack of carefully selected pieces. The editor wants something that references the umbrella look, but evolves it. Rihanna nodded, examining the clothing. They'll position it as a transformation story, she said, running her fingers over a structured jacket. The Ivan girl gone global. I want something that breaks that narrative a bit. Something unexpected. Her stylist tilted her head curiously. You've been thinking about this. I've been watching how they construct these stories, Rihanna replied. The good girl gone bad angle works for now, but I don't want to get locked into someone else's narrative about who I am. Later, after the team departed, she stood on the terrace overlooking the illuminated Los Angeles basin. Lights stretched toward the ocean. A galaxy of human ambition spread at her feet. The air carried the scent of jasmine and distant wealth, so different from the salt-heavy breeze of Bridgetown. Her phone rang, Beyoncé, checking if she needed anything for the night. I'm good, Rihanna assured her, just prepping for tomorrow's shoot. The Billboard cover, Beyoncé recalled. First one as a #1 artist hits different. Everything feels different now, Rihanna admitted. The way people look at me, talk to me, even the contracts they're offering. Get used to it, Beyoncé advised, warmth in her tone. But don't get comfortable with it. Success gives you options. It doesn't guarantee they'll respect your voice. After they hung up, Rihanna returned to the laptop, opening a folder labeled Business Models. Inside were PDF, news articles, and notes she'd been collecting, profiles of artists who'd built empires beyond their music, analyses of fashion brands, studies of endorsement deals, versus ownership structures. She'd begun this research quietly, not yet sharing it with her management or label. Something about the success of Umbrella had crystallized a vision that extended far beyond hit records. If the public saw an effortless rise, a natural star ascending, let them. The reality of late nights studying contracts, business models, and ownership structures would remain private. The following afternoon, the Billboard photo studio hummed with activity. Lighting rigs cast dramatic shadows, while assistants adjusted reflectors and monitors. Rihanna sat in makeup, reviewing tour proposals on her BlackBerry between brushstrokes. 5 minutes, called the photographer, a respected industry veteran known for capturing iconic music imagery. The interviewer, a culture writer from the magazine, approached with recorder in hand. Mind if we chat while they finish your look? I'd love to get some thoughts about your journey from Ponder Replay to dominating global charts with Umbrella. Rihanna smiled, measuring her response. It feels like different lifetimes sometimes, she offered. That girl who recorded Ponder Replays was just hoping for radio play. Now we're talking about world tours and Grammy categories. People are calling you an overnight sensation, the writer continued. How does that characterization sit with you? A subtle shift in Rihanna's expression, almost imperceptible, revealed the gap between public perception and lived reality. 4 years of work isn't exactly overnight, she replied, her tone light but pointed. I'm still just a girl from Barbados who works hard. The results might look effortless in the final cut, but trust me, there's a lot of rehearsal before the camera rolls. The photographer called her to set. As she moved through poses with practiced precision, Rihanna maintained the careful balance she was learning to navigate: project confidence without arrogance, accessibility without vulnerability. Sophistication without losing the authenticity that connected with audiences. Between setups, she overheard her manager discussing potential endorsement deals with the label representative. The cosmetics company is offering 7 figures for a 3-year contract, the label rep mentioned. Standard spokesperson arrangement, fragrance with her name. Rihanna pretended to adjust her earring, listening while appearing absorbed in her reflection. What about creative input? Her manager asked. They're offering consultation rights, came the response. Final decisions stay with their creative team, of course. She filed this information away, neither accepting nor rejecting it outwardly. The photographer called her back to the set, and she slipped seamlessly into the performance of being Rihanna for the camera. That evening, she sat across from Jay-Z in the quiet corner of an upscale restaurant, the kind where discretion came with the reservation. "You're thinking about something," he observed, studying her over the rim of his water glass. I recognized that look. "I'm thinking about ownership," she replied directly. "Not just masters, though that's part of it. I'm thinking bigger." "How much bigger?" "When these companies approach me for endorsements, they want my face, my audience. But they maintain control of the product, the creative direction, the real value." She paused, organizing thoughts that had been forming for months. What if, instead of just being the face, I had actual ownership? Creative control and equity. Jay-Z leaned back slightly, a gesture she'd come to recognize as genuine interest. "Most artists chase the check," he noted. "You're thinking about the cap table." "I don't want to just endorse. I want to architect," she said, the words clarifying her own thinking as she spoke them. "Maybe not now, but eventually." He nodded slowly. "It's a longer game, harder to execute. The companies won't offer it. You'll have to create the leverage to demand it." "Then that's what I'll build toward," she replied simply. The conversation shifted to immediate concerns, tour preparations, the next single strategy, international market development. But something had solidified in that exchange, a North Star beyond the immediate horizon of chart positions and radio play. Later that night, as rain returned to Los Angeles in gentle waves, Rihanna stood at the guest house window, watching water trace patterns down the glass. The symmetry with the song that had transformed her career wasn't lost on her. Rain had become her unintentional signature, the backdrop to this pivotal moment. Her reflection stared back, the red hair, the carefully constructed image that millions now recognized worldwide. Behind that image stood the architect, the strategist, the girl from Barbados with increasingly clear ambitions. The music was the foundation, but not the ceiling. She picked up her notebook, opening to a blank page. At the top, she wrote a single word, Fenty. Below it, she began to list industries, markets, concepts, ideas without clear form yet, but seeds being planted in fertile ground. The soft rhythm of raindrops accompanied her thoughts, a natural soundtrack to quiet ambition taking shape in the midnight hours of 2007. The air hung heavy over Los Angeles that February evening, warm for winter, electric with anticipation. The city was preparing for music's biggest night, the Grammy Awards. But Rihanna Fenty sat quietly in her hotel suite, staring at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Tomorrow would change everything, though not in the way anyone expected. 21 years old and already a global phenomenon, she traced her finger along the edge of the marble counter. 4 albums deep, multi-platinum success, and a 5th project already taking shape in her mind. The wealth was growing, substantial by normal standards, modest by the measures of true power she was beginning to understand. "You ready?" her assistant called from the other room. "Almost," Rihanna replied, her Bajan accent softening the word. What happened the next night would become public record: the assault by Chris Brown in a rented Lamborghini, the police report, the leaked photos of her bruised face. The media storm that followed was merciless. Talk shows, tabloids, a global conversation using her trauma as currency. But what the cameras couldn't capture was what happened inside, the recalibration, the quiet determination that grew in the aftermath. 3 months later, Rihanna sat across from Diane Sawyer in an ABC studio, lights positioned to soften the mood but illuminate her expression. The interview was a calculated risk, an attempt to reclaim her narrative. What's important is that young women understand that it can happen to anyone, she said, her voice steady despite the weight of the words. I don't want people to think that I fell in love with that person because, she paused. This is what I'm attracted to. When the cameras stopped rolling, Sawyer approached her. That took courage, the veteran journalist said. Not courage, Rihanna replied. Necessity. In her car afterward, her manager pressed about upcoming decisions for her darker, more cathartic album, SR-rated RRE. Release it, Rihanna said, looking out at the recession-stricken city. But I'm already thinking about what comes after. After? Something louder, something that lets everyone know I'm not just surviving, I'm scaling. Late 2009, and the recording studio in New York hummed with activity well past midnight. Rihanna reviewed track listings for what would become her fifth album, Loud. The dark, brooding sound of Rated R had been necessary, a primal scream transformed into melody, but commercially it had underperformed. These are strong, she said, circling 3 demos on the page. This is what radio needs right now. Her A&R director nodded. The clubs are going EDM heavy. Everyone's looking for escape after the crash. Then we give them escape, she said, but on my terms. Later that night, as the production team worked on Only Girl in the World, Rihanna stepped outside onto the rooftop. The financial district loomed in the distance, its lights a constellation of power. She thought about the conversation she'd had with Jay-Z over the years, not just about music, but about ownership, about the difference between fame and wealth. You don't want to be hot, he'd told her once. You want to be sustainable. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through property listings her business manager had sent. A $6.9 million mansion in Beverly Hills. 6 bedrooms, swimming pool, security system. Not just a home, but an asset. Something that appreciated while she slept. This one, she texted back. Summer 2010, and the first beats of What's My Name thundered through speakers at a private listening session. The song, featuring Drake, would become one of her many number ones from the S.A. Louds era. The room was filled with label executives, producers, and a few select journalists. When the playback ended, the Def Jam president raised his glass. To another hit. Rihanna smiled, but her mind was already calculating. Radio plays, digital downloads, licensing fees, all substantial but ultimately limited. Earlier that day, she'd read about Dr. Dre's Beats headphones venture. Not just endorsed by him, but owned by him. The profit margins were rumored to be extraordinary. After the session, she met with her core business team in a private room. The tour needs to be massive, she said. I want projections for what it would take to hit $100 million gross. Her tour manager blinked. That's 90+ shows, minimum, multiple continents. Then that's what we do. She opened her laptop, revealing a spreadsheet she'd created. I've been studying Madonna's last tour structure, Beyoncé's Parkwood operation, how Diddy diversified. Her financial advisor looked surprised. You made this? I did, she said. The ceiling on talent income is real. I need to understand where the real money lives. The Beverly Hills mansion was eerily quiet at 3 a.m. Rihanna walked through the spacious rooms, her footsteps echoing on marble floors. 6 months in, and it still didn't quite feel like home, more like a statement, a strategic outpost. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Los Angeles, city lights twinkling below like fallen stars. On the kitchen counter lay contracts for her upcoming fragrance deal. Another revenue stream, another extension of the brand. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother in Barbados. You watching the news? More banks failing. Be careful with your money. Rihanna smiled. Monica Braithwaite had raised her with an accountant's eye for detail, even when they had almost nothing. Now that they had something, that vigilance remained. All good, Mom, she texted back, diversifying like you taught me. She returned to the window. The Chris Brown reconciliation rumors were circulating again, brief meetings that the press had magnified into a reunion. She'd made that mistake once in 2012, a moment of weakness she already recognized as exactly that, a mistake. But tonight, that wasn't what occupied her thoughts. It was the business models. The structures of ownership that turned famous people into wealthy people. The difference between Diddy and the artists signed to his label. The difference between endorsing a product and owning the company that makes it. The production rehearsal for the Hailu's tour stretched into its 14th hour. Dancers collapsed in exhaustion against the stage rigging. Technical directors huddled over lighting consoles, arguing about cue timing. Again, Rihanna said, her voice showing no fatigue despite the physical demands. The transition into S&M isn't tight enough. Her tour director approached cautiously. We're over budget on the LED screens. She shook her head. We need them. This tour grosses $100 million or it's a failure. That's ambitious. That's necessary, she corrected. Do you know what my cut is after everyone gets paid? After the label takes their piece? After production costs, crew salaries, venue fees? He didn't respond. About 20% if we're efficient. That's why scale matters. That's why every detail matters. Later, alone in her dressing room, she studied the tour financial projections. 100 million in gross would mean about 20 million for her after expenses. Substantial money. Life-changing for most people, but still a fraction of what true owners earned. She opened another file on her laptop, notes she'd compiled on equity structures, brand licensing versus ownership, real estate as a vehicle for wealth preservation. The recession had taught everyone harsh lessons about financial fragility. She was determined to build something more durable than hit singles. December 2010, Miami. Rihanna sat poolside at an exclusive hotel, sunglasses shielding her eyes from both the glare and the occasional paparazzi lens that might be aimed her way. Across from her sat Fenty, her father. Their relationship had always been complicated. His battles with addiction, the violence she'd witnessed as a child, the on-and-off presence. But she'd invited him here for a specific reason. I'm setting up a company, she said. Fenty Corp. I want to register it properly. He looked surprised. Using our name? It's my name too, she said quietly. And it's going to mean something beyond music one day. The conversation shifted to her upcoming performance obligations, the mounting demands of her schedule. Privately, she was exhausted. The Child album had spawned multiple number ones, each requiring videos, promotional appearances, radio tours. The physical toll was evident only to those closest to her. You need to rest, her father said, showing rare perception. I'll rest when I own something real, she replied. Later that evening, she met with a senior executive from her label who was visiting Miami. Over dinner at a discreet restaurant, he laid out plans for her next project. We should strike while you're hot, he said. The market is responding to Sloud. We could have another album ready by next summer. She sipped her water, considering. What if we approached this differently? What if my next project wasn't just music? Meaning? Meaning I've been watching how this industry works. The artists who last aren't just making songs, they're building enterprises. The executive leaned back. That comes later. Right now, your value is in the studio and on stage. She smiled politely, but her mind was made up. Later wouldn't do. Later was a luxury afforded to those who already had security. She came from an island where later often meant never. Early 2011, and the first strategy session for what would eventually become Fenty Beauty took place in a private dining room at Nobu Malibu. Present were Rihanna, two executives from a luxury goods conglomerate, and her attorney. The cosmetics market is saturated, one executive cautioned. With products that ignore half the world, Rihanna countered. I'm talking about actual inclusivity. 40 foundation shades minimum, addressing the darkest and lightest skin tones that everyone else ignores. The R&D costs would be significant, and the market capture would be unprecedented, she finished. This isn't charity. This is business. Untapped demographics with disposable income and brand loyalty when someone finally sees them. The meeting ended without firm commitments, but seeds were planted. In her car afterward, her attorney looked impressed. "You've been studying." "I've been living it," she corrected. "Every makeup chair I've ever sat in, the artists have had to mix foundations to match my skin. That's not just my experience. That's millions of women." She looked out at the Pacific Ocean, vast and seemingly limitless. "The music is the platform, not the endpoint. I'm building something that outlasts hit records." As night fell over Los Angeles, Rihanna stood on the balcony of her Beverly Hills mansion. Below, her team was packing equipment for the upcoming Louds Tour 98 shows across Europe, North America, and South America, a logistical behemoth designed to break the $100 million barrier. She thought about the journey from Westbury Road in Barbados to this hilltop, from selling clothes with her mother at a street stall to negotiating equity positions in global ventures. The path hadn't been linear. The 2009 assault had nearly derailed everything, turning her most private pain into public spectacle. But crisis reveals character. In its aftermath, she found a clarity of purpose, not just to survive, but to build, not just to earn, but to own. Her phone rang. It was her business manager with news about a potential partnership with a major athletic wear company. "They're offering 7 figures for a standard endorsement," he said. "Ask about equity instead," she replied without hesitation. "I don't want to just be the face, I want to be a partner." She ended the call and looked back at the city lights, each one representing a story, a struggle, a dream in progress. Her own story was still being written, but the outline was becoming clearer. This was about creating something lasting from the ephemeral nature of fame. The warm night air carried the scent of jasmine from the garden below. Tomorrow would bring another day of rehearsals, contracts, decisions large and small. The tour would be grueling, the schedule relentless. But beyond it all lay something more valuable than applause. The quiet power of ownership, the foundation of an empire still taking shape in her mind, built with the same precision as her. Melodies. The diamonds caught the light as they moved across her skin, 40,000 of them suspended in the darkness of the arena. Rihanna stood at the center of the stage, her silhouette amplified on massive screens behind her, voice carrying through speakers powerful enough to rattle ribs. From her vantage point, the crowd was an ocean of flickering lights, camera phones, glow sticks, illuminated faces. "London," she said into the microphone, her Bajan accent softening the edges of the word. "Make some noise." The response was deafening. The Diamonds World Tour was halfway through its European leg, and tonight's O2 Arena show had sold out in 17 minutes. She closed her eyes momentarily, feeling the vibration of bass through the soles of her custom boots. Numbers scrolled through her mind, 96 shows across 6 continents, production costs that consumed 2/3 of gross revenue, the intricate calculus of what they could afford to add and what they needed to cut. Backstage after the show, her tour manager presented the evening's merchandise figures on a tablet. T-shirts, hoodies, posters, special edition vinyl. Another night, another 6 figures in sales. "We're tracking 30% above projections," he said. Rihanna nodded, toweling sweat from her neck. "And the VIP packages. Sold out through Paris. The meet and greet photos are trending." She studied the spreadsheet, mentally sorting the fixed costs from the variables. This wasn't just art anymore. It was commerce, infrastructure, employment for 87 people who traveled with her, ate with her, depended on her decisions. "Cut the second confetti drop," she said finally. "It's redundant, and we save 5,000 a night. And I want to see applications for 3 new backup dancers. The right side feels thin during Where Have You Been? 2. The tour manager made notes, accustomed to her precision. She'd developed a reputation, demanding but fair, unwilling to tolerate waste or mediocrity. No dead weight, a philosophy she was already applying to every venture that carried her name. In a London hotel suite the following afternoon, Rihanna sat across from executives from River Island, the British fast fashion retailer. Sketches were spread across a glass table, her capsule collection slated for release in 3 months. "The margins are tighter on the denim pieces," said the head of production. A woman with steel grey hair and quick eyes. But we can make it work if we adjust the hardware. Rihanna ran her fingers over a rendering of a denim jacket with oversized pockets. The hardware stays. It's the signature element. She tapped another design. This crop top, what's the timeline from approved sketch to store? 12 weeks minimum. 6 for production, 2 for quality control, 4 for distribution to retail channels. She did the mental calendar math. That puts us past the launch date. We could expedite. No. Drop it from the collection. I'd rather have fewer pieces that arrive on schedule than promise something we can't deliver. The executive looked momentarily startled. Most celebrities she worked with prioritized their creative vision above logistics. This one understood supply chains. Later, alone with her business manager, Rihanna drank green tea and reviewed the contract terms for her Armani collaboration. It's a licensing deal, he explained. You approve designs. They pay a flat fee plus royalties on units sold. Low risk, decent return. She frowned slightly. What's the ownership structure? They own the designs and intellectual property. You're essentially renting them your name and aesthetic input. And if it sells beyond expectations, the royalty percentage stays fixed. There's a ceiling on what you can earn. She set down her tea. The suite was quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioning and London traffic 16 floors below. This model doesn't scale, she said finally. We're leaving too much value on the table. For the next deal, I want to explore ownership options, even if it means more risk up front. Her manager made a note. He'd learned not to underestimate her ability to see around corners. The fashion collaborations weren't just about expanding her brand or generating quick revenue. They were education, each one teaching her something about the industry she would one day disrupt. The Clara Lionel Foundation took shape in a series of meetings held between tour dates in the spring of 2012. Rihanna sat with lawyers and non-profit specialists in a New York office, the city lights glittering outside Rain Street windows. We've outlined 2 options, said the consultant, sliding documents across the polished table. A donor-advised fund would give you maximum flexibility and privacy. A Section 501c3 public charity requires more disclosure and a formal governance structure. Profit. Rihanna studied the papers. The differences in transparency? Substantial. With a DAF, the public doesn't see where or when you distribute funds. With a public charity, you file detailed 990 forms annually showing exactly who received what. And the minimum distribution requirements. Public charities must demonstrate regular activity. DAFs have no minimum. She thought about her grandparents, Clara and Lionel Braithwaite, whose names would grace the foundation. Her grandmother had taught her accountability through small, consistent actions. The foundation would reflect that principle. We'll establish it as a public charity, she decided. I want transparency built into the structure from the beginning. The lawyers exchanged glances. Most celebrities of her stature preferred the privacy of donor-advised funds. The focus will be education and emergency response, she continued, starting with scholarships for Barbadian students to attend US universities. I want to see a draft of the selection criteria by next week. Later, she called her mother from the balcony of her hotel room, the New York skyline, a constellation of lights before her. They spoke in the easy rhythm of their regular conversations, slipping between topics, between English and Bajan patois. The foundation papers are signed, Rihanna said. We're starting small, but it's built to grow. Your grandmother would be so proud, Monica Braithwaite replied, her voice carrying across the Atlantic. Remember what she always said about giving? Do it quietly, but do it properly. Exactly. How are you feeling, love? You sound tired. Rihanna watched an airplane's lights crawl across the night sky. Touring takes it out of you, but I'm learning things I couldn't learn any other way. About music. About business. About scale. About what happens when you move large groups of people in the same direction. The criticism appeared first on social media, then spread to music blogs, and eventually mainstream publications. Photos from a recent video shoot showed Rihanna wearing a bindi, the traditional Hindu forehead decoration. Earlier appearances had featured her in dashikis and other cultural dress, not from her Caribbean heritage. In her suite at the Four Seasons in Paris, she scrolled through the comments on her phone while her creative director waited nervously. Cultural appropriation, she read aloud. Commodifying sacred symbols for aesthetic value. She set the phone down. They're not wrong. We can issue a statement. No, she interrupted. Statements are defensive. I want solutions. She paced the room thinking. From now on, we build more diverse creative teams. If we're drawing inspiration from a culture, we bring in stylists and consultants from that background. This isn't just about avoiding criticism. It's about getting it right. The creative director made notes quickly. And casting, she continued. Every video, every photo shoot, every runway show. I want to see all shades, all sizes, all backgrounds, not as tokens or statements, as standard practice. The We Found Love video was already in post-production. She requested the rough cut and spent 3 hours that evening reviewing it, noting the diversity of the cast, the authenticity of the scenes. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. A visual language that would eventually extend beyond music videos to her entire business philosophy. The Time 100 Gala transformed the Frederick P. Rose Hall at Lincoln Center into a gathering of global influence. Rihanna, named to the prestigious list, moved through the crowd in Alexander McQueen, stopping for photographs with world leaders, business titans, and fellow artists. At her assigned table, she found herself seated beside the CEO of a major beauty conglomerate. "Congratulations on the recognition," he said as they were served the first course. "Your tour numbers are impressive." "Thank you. I understand your company just acquired 3 indie brands." He looked mildly surprised that she tracked such information. "Yes, the beauty landscape is consolidating. Scale is everything in this business." "Scale and representation," she corrected. "I've been watching the market. Most brands still treat diversity as a marketing exercise rather than a core philosophy." "There's only so much shelf space in Sephora," he said with a practiced smile. "The economics favor broad appeal over niche markets." She took a sip of water. Perhaps the definition of niche needs reconsideration. Later, she described the conversation to her longtime friend and creative collaborator Melissa Ford as they rode back to their hotel. "He didn't take me seriously," Rihanna said, removing her earrings. "Not really. I could see it in his eyes." "His loss," Melissa replied. "What did you think of the event overall?" Rihanna gazed out the window at New York sliding past. It was illuminating. These gatherings, they're not just ceremonies. They're architecture. Who sits where, who speaks to whom, who's invited, and who isn't. And what did you learn from the architecture? "That influence without ownership is temporary," she said, "and I'm not interested in temporary." The Diamonds World Tour concluded in November 2013 in New Orleans, the final show of a 6-month global journey. The production had grossed $137 million, setting attendance records in multiple markets and cementing Rihanna's status as one of music's most bankable touring artists. In her private dressing room after the final bow, she sat alone for a moment, still in her performance clothes, sweat cooling on her skin. The room was quiet, the roar of the audience now just an echo. On the makeup table lay a leather portfolio containing the tour's financial summary, revenue streams, expenses, net profit. She opened it, scanning the columns of figures. The economics were impressive, but sobering. Production costs, crew salaries, venue fees, insurance, travel. These consumed 2/3 of gross revenue. Still, her net from the tour cycle would approach $40 million, capital that could fund her next ventures. There was a knock at the door, and her tour director entered with champagne and glasses. "To the most successful tour of your career," he said, pouring. She accepted a glass. "To the team that made it possible." They clinked glasses, and she took a small sip. "We've come a long way from that first arena tour," he said. "Yes," she agreed, "and we've learned valuable lessons." She tapped the financial summary. About pricing strategy, about margin management, about the value of the right people in the right roles. Later, as the crew celebrated at the tour's wrap party, she stood slightly apart, observing the dynamics of the team she'd assembled. Some had been with her since the beginning. Others were new additions who had proven their worth. The culture she'd fostered was professional but familial, demanding but supportive. No dead weight, a philosophy she would carry forward into every venture. Her phone vibrated with a message from home. Her mother sending a photo of new scholarship recipients at the Clara Lionel Foundation's first formal ceremony in Barbados. Young faces, bright with possibility, holding certificates that would take them from the island to universities in the United States. Standing there in New Orleans, surrounded by the infrastructure of her success, Rihanna felt the separate strands of her life, music, fashion, philanthropy, beginning to weave themselves into a cohesive vision. The tour was ending, but something else was taking shape, something that transcended performance, something with permanence. She slipped the phone back into her pocket and rejoined the celebration, already thinking about what came next. The December air in New York carried the familiar chill of ambition and possibility. Rihanna sat in a sleek conference room at Puma's Manhattan headquarters, her slender fingers tracing the edge of the contract before her. Creative director, not just another endorsement deal, but a seat at the table. $1 million a year was the rumored figure, but the money wasn't what made her pause. It was the shift this represented. "The paperwork looks straightforward," said her attorney, glancing up from his copy. "But I want to be clear about expectations. They're buying more than your name." Rihanna nodded, her dark eyes reflecting the muted overhead lights. "I know exactly what they're buying and what I'm getting," she signed with deliberate strokes. December 2014 marked not just another business arrangement, but an education. She would learn how a global brand operated from the inside, the supply chains, the design reviews, the factory lead times in Asia, the wholesale margins. Knowledge that couldn't be bought, only absorbed through presence. 3 months later, Rihanna sat silently in Puma's headquarters in Herzogenaurach, Germany, watching executives discuss Q2 projections. The boardroom carried that particular European corporate sterility, all clean lines and efficiency. She wasn't there to perform or pose. She was there to understand how decisions moved through an organization, how products went from concept to consumer. "The colorways for the first Fenty trainers need approval by next Thursday," said the head of product development, sliding a folder across the polished table. "I'll need the weekend with these," she replied, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had become her boardroom signature. No longer the girlish energy of her early 20s, but something more calibrated, measured, strategic. That evening in her hotel room, she spread the design materials across the bed, studying each variation. Her phone buzzed, another text from the label about the album. "Need release date confirmation. Radio partners pushing." She set the phone down without replying. Auntie wasn't ready. The public wanted the familiar, upbeat Rihanna, radio Rihanna, the formula that had generated hit after hit. But 8 albums in, she felt the weight of repetition, the creative suffocation of expectation. "You can't rush greatness," she whispered to herself, turning back to the shoe designs. Throughout 2005, the pressure mounted. Label executives scheduled meetings. Her team fielded increasingly anxious calls. The music industry had fully transitioned to streaming. Spotify had reached 50 million users. Apple Music had launched. Artists earned fractions of pennies per stream. The economics demanded constant content, touring, presence. Summer faded into fall. Los Angeles nights grew longer as sessions for Auntie stretched past midnight, then into the early hours. In a dimly lit studio in Hollywood, Rihanna sat alone at 2 a.m. listening to the latest mix of Work. The sparse beat pulsed through the monitors, her patois-heavy vocals floating over the minimal production. The door opened. Her A&R representative entered with the label President, both looking grave. "We need to talk about the direction," the president began. "The market research is telling us." "The market doesn't know what it wants until it hears it," Rihanna interrupted, her voice low but firm. This isn't like the other albums. That's exactly our concern. Radio is looking for, I'm not making this for radio. The silence that followed held the weight of millions of dollars, countless careers, years of momentum. The business apparatus around her had grown enormous. Managers, publicists, label executives, tour personnel, all dependent on her artistic output, maintaining its commercial trajectory. "Release it my way," she said finally, "or release me." The ultimatum hung in the air. Both men knew she meant it. This wasn't a negotiating tactic. In that moment, the power dynamic crystallized. They needed her more than she needed them. The infrastructure of celebrity could be rebuilt, but her vision could not be replaced. Work was released in January 2016, exactly as she intended. Raw, uncompromising, distinctly Bajan. Industry insiders whispered it was too strange, too sparse for mainstream success. 9 weeks at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 silenced the doubters. Anti followed, debuting at the top spot. But even as she celebrated this artistic victory, Rihanna found herself restless. The album cycle had become predictable: record, release, tour, repeat. The returns were capped by streaming economics. Her body, her voice, her stamina was finite. On a rainy afternoon in March 2016, she sat across from executives from LVMH Kendo division in a private dining room at Nobu, Malibu. The ocean stretched grey and endless beyond the windows, mirroring her mood. Contemplative, vast with possibility. "Beauty is the logical next step," said the Kendo president, sliding a preliminary business plan across the table. "We can provide capital, infrastructure, and access to Sephora's global network. Over 2,000 stores, plus direct-to-consumer channels." Rihanna studied the document without speaking. The equity structure outlined was generous, far beyond the typical celebrity arrangement. This wasn't an endorsement, it was partnership, ownership. "I want final approval on everything," she said finally. "Not input, not consultation, final approval." "That's unusual in our structure." "So am I," she replied simply. Later that week, in her Beverly Hills home, Rihanna convened a meeting of her core team. The living room was minimalist, expensive but not ostentatious, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. Her business manager, attorney, and 2 closest advisors sat waiting as she paced slowly. "We're implementing 360-degree reviews across all operations," she announced. "Everyone gets evaluated by managers, peers, and subordinates. No exceptions." Her business manager raised an eyebrow. "That's uncommon in entertainment companies." "We're not just an entertainment company anymore." She stopped pacing and faced them directly. "I need people who've lived the problems we're solving. And I need to know quickly when someone isn't performing." "You mean?" "I mean, we fire fast. No drama, no long goodbyes. This isn't about loyalty for loyalty's sake, it's about results." The ruthless efficiency she'd learned from touring, where every delay cost thousands, where technical failures couldn't be tolerated, was now being imported into her corporate structure. The stakes were higher. Building companies required different muscles than building tours. As spring turned to summer in 2016, Rihanna's calendar filled with meetings most fans couldn't imagine. Supply chain consultations for Fenty Beauty, formula testing, focus groups with women of diverse skin tones, distribution strategy sessions with Sephora executives, legal reviews of trademark applications. On a sweltering July evening, she sat on her private terrace in downtown Manhattan, the city humming below. Jay-Z's voice came through the speakerphone, calm and measured as always. "The NFL reached out again about the Super Bowl halftime show," he said. "Same offer as before." She sipped her wine, considering. In previous years, she'd declined on principle, supporting Colin Kaepernick's protests against police brutality and systemic racism. The stance had been clear, uncompromising. "Tell them I'm keeping my options open," she replied after a long pause. "My priorities are evolving." "Fair enough. How's the beauty line progressing?" On schedule for next year. The foundation range is revolutionary, 40 shades from the start. No one's ever done that at launch. You're building something different now, Jay observed. Assets, not just appearances. The conversation shifted to LVMH's corporate structure, the potential for expansions beyond beauty. Her network was thickening, no longer just music industry connections, but corporate executives, supply chain experts, retail strategists, manufacturing specialists. The architecture of real wealth was taking shape around her. Later that night, alone in her bedroom, Rihanna reviewed the financial projections for Fenty Beauty's first year. The numbers were staggering. 9-figure revenue potential within months of launch. But beyond the projections, she understood something deeper was happening. Her journey from endorsements to co-creation with equity represented a fundamental shift in leverage. She thought back to her earliest deals, wearing clothes she didn't design, representing products she didn't own, building value she couldn't capture. Now she sat at boardroom tables, not as entertainment, but as leadership. The lamp cast soft shadows across her face as she closed the folder. Anti would be her last album for some time, though she hadn't announced this publicly. The music industry's economics made little sense compared to what she was building. Streaming paid fractions of pennies, ownership paid in multiples. Her phone lit up with another text from the label, inquiries about tour plans, recording sessions, the expected next cycle. She left it unanswered. Outside, Manhattan glittered with a million lights, a fitting metaphor for the possibilities spreading before her. She had transformed from performer to proprietor, from talent to strategist. The woman who had once been defined by singles and albums was redefining herself as something far more enduring, an architect of lasting value. In the quiet of that moment, Rihanna understood with perfect clarity that she was no longer just writing songs. She was writing history. And unlike music, this composition wouldn't be measured in minutes or streams, but in generations and billions. The night deepened around her as she finally drifted toward sleep, her mind not on melodies, but on manufacturing timelines, equity structures, and the empire taking shape just beyond the horizon. The midnight rain streaked across the windows of the Sephora flagship store in Times Square, casting long shadows through the illuminated displays. Inside, a small team worked with precise urgency, arranging glass bottles in perfect formation, each one catching the light like amber crystals. In the center of this quiet storm stood Rihanna, her fingers trailing across the sleek packaging of what the business world would soon recognize as a seismic disruption. 40 shades, she murmured, more to herself than to the executive from LVMH who stood beside her. Not 15, not 20, 40. The Pro-Filter foundation bottles created a spectrum that ranged from the palest ivory to the deepest espresso, an unprecedented color range that acknowledged what the beauty industry had long ignored, that women came in more than a handful of shades. "We're taking a risk with inventory management," the executive said, his voice carrying the polite caution of someone who had seen celebrity vanity projects come and go. "Production costs for this many SKUs are necessary," Rihanna finished, her Bajan accent softening the steel in her words. "This isn't charity. This is business. There are women with money in their pockets who have never found their shade. They've been waiting." She knew this truth not from focus groups or market research, but from lived experience, from friends who mixed foundations like chemists, from cousins who shopped the darkest shade in a range, and still found it too light. The market gap wasn't just an opportunity, it was a void that echoed with frustration. The September 2017 launch date loomed just days away. The strategy had been meticulously crafted, positioned Fenty Beauty as premium but accessible, with foundation priced at $34 high enough to signal quality, low enough to encourage first-time luxury buyers. The margins would hover around 60%, comfortable breathing room in an industry where image was currency and marketing traditionally swallowed profits. Later that night, in the hushed opulence of her hotel suite, Rihanna pored over spreadsheets with her attorney from Debevoise and Plimpton, the kind of firm that normally handled mergers for Fortune 500 companies, not beauty startups. The equity structure is sound, he said, sliding a document across the polished table. 15 to 30% ownership depending on performance targets. LVMH's Kendo division handles production, distribution, and initial capital outlay. She nodded, taking in the implications. Unlike her previous forays into fashion collaborations, she had put no money down. Her currency was her name, her taste, and her direct line to 150 million social media followers, an audience that would cost traditional beauty brands tens of millions in advertising to reach. And I retain creative control, she confirmed. Not a question, but a statement of fact. Absolute. The contract is explicit on that point. What remained unspoken was the elegance of the arrangement. LVMH provided the infrastructure, the supply chain mastery, the distribution through Sephora, which they also owned. She provided the vision, the authenticity, and the most valuable asset in modern marketing, direct consumer connection without intermediaries. The morning of the launch brought a crystalline September sky over Manhattan. At the Sephora in Times Square, a line had begun forming before dawn. Young women in hijabs, middle-aged executives, college students, makeup artists clutching professional kits. Inside, Rihanna moved through final preparations with the focused calm of someone who had weathered album releases, world tours, and fashion weeks. This was different, though. Music belonged to the label. Tours were temporary. Clothes came and went with seasons. But this had her name fused to its DNA. The digital strategy is ready, her social media director said, showing her the cascade of content prepared for release tutorials, behind-the-scenes footage, customer testimonials. We're estimating reach of 200 million in the first 24 hours. What would normally cost a legacy brand millions in media buys would happen organically. Every post she shared would reach her audience without a dollar spent on placement. The unit economics were revolutionary: negligible customer acquisition cost, premium pricing, and repeat purchases built into the product design. When the doors finally opened, the crowd surged forward with the momentum of pent-up anticipation. Rihanna watched from a private viewing area as women of every complexion found their matches, some with tears in their eyes, holding bottles up to their wrists with the reverence usually reserved for precious objects. "We're going to sell out of the deepest and lightest shades first," she predicted to the Kendo executive beside her. "Those are the customers who've been waiting the longest." By midday, the data was already proving her right. The darkest and palest shades were moving at twice the rate of the middle range. By evening, sales figures were flooding in from Sephora locations across the country, each report more stunning than the last. Later that week, in the quiet of her apartment, she took a video call from Jay-Z, whose strategic counsel had helped shape her business decisions since her earliest days at Def Jam. "The numbers just came in," she said, unable to keep the satisfaction from her voice. 100 million in the first 40 days. He gave a low whistle. "That's Kylie Jenner territory, and you did it without giving up the majority stake." "I learned from watching you," she replied. "Own your masters, own your business." The conversation shifted to the mechanics of scale: how to meet demand without sacrificing quality, how to expand internationally without diluting the brand proposition, how to leverage the momentum without burning out the supply chain. "The beauty industry doesn't move this fast," Jay said. "They're used to 18-month development cycles. You just compress that to what, 6 months? 4, she corrected, and we're already developing the holiday collection. The speed was possible because of structural advantages the old beauty empires didn't have. Cosmetics faced lighter FDA regulation than pharmaceuticals. The LVMH partnership provided existing manufacturing relationships, and her creative decisions could be implemented without layers of corporate approval. As fall deepened, the impact of Fenty Beauty's launch rippled through the industry. Competitors scrambled to expand their shade ranges. Established brands rushed new formulations to market. The term, the Fenty effect, began appearing in business publications, codifying what industry insiders already knew. The rules had changed overnight. In October, she visited the manufacturing facility in Italy where the foundations were produced. Walking the floor in a white lab coat, hair pulled back, she inspected pigments and watched the filling machines with the attention of someone who understood that quality control wasn't a department, but a mindset. "This batch looks different," she said, comparing a sample to the standard. "The undertone is too yellow." The chemist beside her nodded, impressed by her eye. "We adjusted the formula slightly for scale. We can revert to the original." "Do it," she said simply. "Consistency is everything. If someone buys their second bottle and it doesn't match the first, we've lost them." This wasn't the behavior of a celebrity licensor who collected checks while professionals did the work. This was the diligence of an owner who understood that reputation was built or broken in these details. Back in New York, she met with her financial advisors in a sleek conference room overlooking the Hudson River. The revenue projections had been revised upward 3 times since launch. If the trajectory held, Fenty Beauty would do $500 million in its first full-year performance that put it in the same category as decades-old legacy brands. "Your equity stake," the advisor said, pointing to a figure on the balance sheet, "is now your single largest asset. More than music royalties, more than real estate." She absorbed this fact quietly. The mythology of the effortless icon, the one who seemed to float through life making hit records and turning heads, had always been at odds with the reality of her work ethic. Now, the 18-hour days, the factory visits, the formula testing on her own skin were documented facts captured by Harvard Business School professors preparing a case study on the brand's launch. In December, as the year drew to a close, she sat alone in her apartment, reviewing the final numbers of Fenty Beauty's first quarter. Outside, snow fell over New York, softening the city's angles. The spreadsheet before her told a story of transformation, not just of an industry forced to acknowledge its blind spots, but of wealth creation on a scale that transcended entertainment. Awnings. The structure was elegant in its simplicity. She had leveraged her fame into equity, and that equity was now generating value that would compound over years, not evaporate with changing tastes. Unlike touring income, which required physical presence and endless travel, or endorsement deals that paid flat fees, this was an asset that worked while she slept. Her phone buzzed with a text from the LVMH chairman. "Harvard wants to make Fenty Beauty an official case study. Congratulations." She smiled at the message's understated recognition of what they'd accomplished. The beauty industry operated on the illusion of empowerment while reinforcing narrow standards. Fenty Beauty had revealed that inclusion wasn't just morally right, but commercially powerful, that serving the underserved could build a billion-dollar enterprise. As midnight approached, bringing 2017 to a close, she allowed herself a rare moment of stillness. The path from selling clothes with her mother in Barbados to launching a global beauty brand had not been straight or simple. But the lessons had accumulated like compound interest. Own what you create, understand what you sign, know your worth in the marketplace. The foundation bottles caught the light from the city beyond her windows, their spectrum of colors embodying both an aesthetic and a philosophy. In the reflection of the glass, she saw not just products, but proof that the gap between visionary and businesswoman could be closed, that authenticity could be monetized without being compromised, that wealth could be built by seeing people who had long been invisible to an industry that claimed to celebrate beauty. Outside, the last minutes of the year slipped away, carrying with them the final echoes of a transformation. Rihanna, now a beauty mogul whose net worth had fundamentally changed in nature, not just number, turned off her laptop and let the darkness envelop her, a darkness that, like the deepest shades of her foundation line, was rich with possibility and long overdue for recognition. The Manhattan skyline glittered against the night sky like diamonds scattered across black velvet as Rihanna gazed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse suite. Beyond the glass, spring rain misted the city, softening the hard edges of skyscrapers. She traced her finger along the condensation forming on her champagne flute, lost in thought. 300 million in 8 months, she murmured to herself, the number both abstract and concrete, a validation of vision rather than a celebration of wealth. Fenty Beauty had exceeded every projection, but tonight her mind was elsewhere. In less than 48 hours, Savage X Fenty would launch, and she could feel the familiar tightness in her chest that preceded every major venture. It wasn't fear precisely, more like the body's recognition of a moment that would demand everything. "Melissa, what do you think?" Rihanna turned from the window toward her longtime friend and creative collaborator, Melissa Ford, who was reviewing the final imagery for the launch on a tablet. "These look incredible, Raya. I've never seen anything like this in lingerie campaigns before." Melissa swiped through photos featuring women of all sizes, colors, and gender presentations. "That's the point," Rihanna said, her voice softening as she moved to look over Melissa's shoulder. "Victoria's Secret has been telling women how they should look for decades. We're showing them how they already look." The suite's phone rang, interrupting their reverie. Jennifer Rosales, operations lead for the nascent Savage X project, was calling from the war room 10 floors below. "The textile team needs final approval on the website flow before midnight," Jennifer reported, her voice betraying the pressure of pre-launch logistics. "The subscription model needs your sign-off." "I'll be down in 20, Rihanna replied, already calculating the details that would determine success or failure. The architecture mattered, especially the back end. Textiles infrastructure had proven itself with Fable Techs, turning Kate Hudson's activewear brand into a subscription powerhouse. Now they would deploy that same engine for lingerie. She ended the call and caught Melissa watching her. "What?" Rihanna asked. "Nothing. Just remembering that girl who used to sing demos in her bedroom in Barbados. Now she's running a lingerie empire." Rihanna smiled but shook her head. "Not yet. Building, not running. Big difference." The following morning found her in a sleek conference room, surrounded by investors for what would become Savage X Fenty's Series A round. Sunlight streamed through eastern-facing windows, illuminating financial projections on a screen. $150 million. The number carried weight, but more importantly, it carried the message that this was not a celebrity vanity project. "We're targeting a valuation of $1 billion by 2021, the lead investor was saying, his British accent crisp in the climate-controlled air. "The DTC lingerie market is fragmented, and Victoria's Secret is vulnerable. Their sales are declining, their image is increasingly dated." Rihanna nodded, but her focus was on the term sheet in front of her. She'd learned lessons about equity since her early days in the industry. A small, almost imperceptible frown crossed her face as she remembered an investment from a few years back, Stance Socks, around 2015. She'd put in nearly $500,000, but the equity slice had been too small in a large round. The lesson had crystallized since then. Small checks in big rounds didn't move the needle. "I want to make sure our ownership structure is clear," she said, her Bargain accent softening her directness. "What matters isn't just the valuation, but our percentage at that valuation." The room shifted slightly. Celebrity investors were supposed to be grateful for access, not strategic about ownership. "Of course," the investor replied smoothly. "We're thinking 20 to 30% for your stake, which would be significant." "That works," she said, adding with a slight smile, "for now." Later that afternoon, her phone lit up with a text from Jay-Z. "Congrats on Savage. Heard about the round. Smart structure." She appreciated the acknowledgement, but felt a familiar tension. Since her early Def Jam days, the narrative had been that Jay had created her, that her business acumen was somehow borrowed rather than built. The truth was more complex. He had been an important mentor, opening doors and sharing knowledge. But her path since 2009 had been increasingly self-determined. "Thanks. Been studying the game," she texted back. In May 2018, Savage X Fenty launched to immediate acclaim. The website crashed within minutes from overwhelming traffic. The inclusive sizing, XS to 3X, generated headlines, but the back-end subscription model generated cash flow. Members paid monthly fees for discounts and early access, creating the predictable revenue investors craved. Summer brought both triumph and complication. A customs dispute with Barbados had been simmering for months. Allegations of undeclared luxury goods worth around $500,000. Rihanna sat with her financial advisors in a wood-paneled office in downtown Manhattan, reviewing the settlement terms. "It's a straightforward compliance issue," a tax attorney explained. "Better to settle than fight, especially in your home country." She nodded, signing the documents without hesitation. Unlike some of her contemporaries, she had no interest in aggressive tax strategies or offshore shelters. She paid her California state taxes as a resident and federal taxes on her global income. The cleaner the books, the fewer distractions from building. "I want a full review of our compliance structures across all entities," she said. "Fenty Beauty, Savage X, music royalties through Rawraj Trade, everything. I'd rather pay more than deal with these issues." The attorney looked slightly surprised. Most clients asked how to pay less, not how to ensure they were paying enough. "We'll set it up," he promised. As autumn approached, whispers about a new venture began circulating in fashion circles. Bernard Arnault, chairman and CEO of LVMH, had taken notice of Fenty Beauty's success and was contemplating something unprecedented, a luxury fashion house built around Rihanna. First new Maison LVMH would launch since Christian Lacroix in 1987. In September, she sat across from Arnault in LVMH's Paris headquarters, a 70th-century building on Avenue Montaigne. Rain tapped against centuries-old windows as they discussed what would become Fenty Maison. "The structure would be different from your beauty line," Arnault explained, his manner both patrician and pragmatic. "Luxury fashion operates on different margins, different calendars. The capital intensity is higher up front." Rihanna understood the subtext. Beauty's 60% margins and rapid inventory turns created a forgiving business model. Fashion was more demanding, 40% margins, slower turnover, higher upfront costs for fabrics, ateliers, and runway shows. "I understand the difference," she replied. "But I also understand what Fenty means now. It's not just a name, it's a promise of inclusion at every price point. We can bring that to high fashion too." Arnault nodded, but his eyes remained calculating. "You would be the first black woman to head an LVMH house. The symbolism is significant." "I'm more interested in the substance," she countered. "Can we build something that lasts? That's the real question." By early 2019, her world had expanded to include regular trips to Paris, where she immersed herself in the mechanics of haute couture. Her apartment in the 16th arrondissement became a second home, its walls covered with sketches and fabric swatches. One evening in February, she sat with French fashion editor Corinne Reutfeld in a small bistro near Place Vendôme, the two women sharing a bottle of Bordeaux as they discussed aesthetic. "Vision. The challenge with luxury," Corinne explained, her accent thick but precise, "is balance. Too accessible, you lose prestige. Too exclusive, you lose relevance." Rihanna considered this, watching rain-slicked cobblestones gleam under streetlights outside. "Beauty taught me something important. Inclusion isn't charity, it's market capture. Women with very dark skin spend money too, but nobody made foundation for them before Fenty." "And you think this translates to €5,000 dresses?" Corinne asked, not dismissively but curiously. "I think luxury should make people feel seen, not excluded," Rihanna replied. "That doesn't mean cheaper, it means considered. Different bodies, different cultures, different needs, all at luxury quality and price." In May 2019, LVMH officially announced Fenty Maison, making Rihanna the first black woman to lead a house under the conglomerate's umbrella. The global press seized on the historical significance, but behind closed doors, she was already confronting the realities of high fashion's unique demands. Fashion required 6-month design to retail cycles, millions for runway shows, and profit margins that justified $500 t-shirts and $2,000 coats. The learning curve was steep, the feedback loop slower than beauty's immediate sales metrics. By late summer, she was conducting her first round of annual 360-degree reviews across all Fenty entities. Even C-suite executives received feedback from their subordinates, an unusual practice that reflected her belief in meritocracy over hierarchy. Some people won't survive this process, Jennifer Rosales warned as they prepared for a difficult conversation with an underperforming executive. That's the point, Rihanna replied. I can't afford sentimentality, neither can our unit economics. The reviews revealed strengths and weaknesses across her growing empire. Savage X was scaling effectively, its subscription model generating predictable revenue. Fenty Beauty continued its explosive growth. But early signs from Maison Fenty were concerning beautiful products that weren't finding their audience fast enough for LVMH's expectations. In September, she granted a rare in-depth interview to the New York Times. Seated in her Manhattan apartment, surrounded by art collected over years of travel, she reflected on her unexpected journey. I never thought I'd make this much money, she told the reporter, so a number is not going to stop me from working. The quote was revealing. Wealth had never been the goal, merely the consequence. What drove her was agency, the power to build what she wanted and control what she built. After the interview, she sat alone in her living room, watching night fall over the city. Her phone buzzed with a message from home, her mother checking in from Barbados. She smiled, remembering the woman who had taught her to count money in market stalls, who had shown her that financial literacy was a form of freedom. Tomorrow would bring more meetings, more decisions, more building. The Savage X team was already planning their first major fashion show to be live-streamed on Amazon Prime Video. Fenty Beauty was developing new categories. Maison Fenty would require careful steering through fashion's treacherous waters. But tonight, in the quiet of her penthouse, Rihanna Fenty allowed herself a moment of reflection. The girl from Westbury Road had built something larger than herself. Not just companies, but systems. Not just products, but possibilities. Outside, Manhattan continued its endless pulse, indifferent to individual stories. Inside, she sipped her tea and made mental notes for tomorrow's meetings. The work was never finished, it merely evolved. And in that evolution lay the true wealth, not in accounts or valuations, but in the freedom to shape her own narrative, one decision at a time. The rain began again, gentle against the windows. She let the sound lull her toward sleep, knowing that morning would arrive with its own demands, its own opportunities. That was the rhythm of empire building. Constant motion punctuated by moments of stillness, where the path forward revealed itself to those patient enough to listen. The evening shadows lengthened across the marble countertop as Rihanna traced her finger along the sleek packaging of Fenty Skin. July 2020. A strange time to launch anything, let alone a new beauty venture. Outside her Los Angeles home, the world had retreated into isolation, cities emptied by an invisible enemy that had rewritten the rules of human proximity overnight. She lifted the hydrating toner to the light. The soft pink liquid caught the sunset's glow through floor-to-ceiling windows. Simple, essential, designed for everyone, that had been her mandate to the chemists and designers. No pink for her and blue for him. No complicated 12-step rituals. Just clean, straightforward skincare that worked for all complexions, all genders. Pandemic launch, she murmured to herself, the words carrying both irony and determination. The world might have stopped, but Rihanna Fenty had not. Her phone buzzed. Chiara Pardo, her creative director, was calling with final approval needed on digital assets for tomorrow's launch. The site's stress test is complete, Chiara reported. We're ready for traffic spikes up to 300% above projections. And if we exceed that, Rihanna asked, her voice calm but eyes alert, then we'll have the best problem in beauty right now. She smiled faintly. While fashion houses were furloughing staff and luxury brands were delaying launches, she was expanding. The analytics told a clear story. Skincare sales were surging during lockdown. People trapped at home were investing in self-care. E-commerce was accelerating by years, not months. The products are in warehouses, no supply chain issues, she pressed. All stocked. Sephora's online inventory is loaded. Our direct-to-consumer pipeline is green across the board. Rihanna nodded, satisfied. She'd spent 2 years developing the line, testing formulations on her own sensitive skin, rejecting dozens of iterations until each product met her standard. Now, like her foundation range before it, Fenty Skin would enter the world as both a business proposition and a statement. Inclusive luxury wasn't charity, it was untapped market opportunity. "Let's light the fuse," she said. The September night wrapped around her Barbadian childhood home like a familiar blanket. Through the open window, she could see palm fronds swaying against a star-filled sky so different from Los Angeles or New York. On her laptop, a Zoom meeting with Clara Lionel Foundation staff displayed faces in squares, each waiting for her guidance. The ventilators arrived in Bridgetown this morning, her foundation director confirmed. 30 units, as requested by the Queen Elizabeth Hospital Administration. Rihanna nodded, making notes in a leather-bound journal. "And the food banks?" "The 5 million has been distributed according to the emergency protocol. Food banks in New York, Los Angeles, New Orleans, and the Caribbean are receiving funding now. The Sean Carter Foundation match is confirmed for the additional 2 million for undocumented workers, children of incarcerated parents, and domestic violence victims." She looked up. "Timing is everything here. These families needed help yesterday. We're processing payments as fast as banking protocols allow. The 50,000 meals for New York City are being prepared and distributed daily." Outside her window, Barbados slept under curfew. The island nation's tourism-dependent economy had been devastated by travel bans. Local hospitals, always under-resourced, now faced a pandemic with limited ICU capacity. "I want daily updates on disbursement speed," she said. "People can't eat promises." After the call ended, she remained at the window, thinking about scale. 5 million was substantial, but measured against global need, it was a droplet. Some criticized celebrity philanthropy as vanity-rich people applying band-aids to gushing wounds. The critique had merit, but she'd insisted on Clara Lionel Foundation operating differently: focused grants, measurable outcomes, transparency in reporting. The foundation's lean operation maintained low overhead, maximizing dollars that reached communities. Her phone lit up with a text from Jay-Z. "Ventilators landed. Good work." She texted back a simple, "Thank you." Their professional relationship had evolved from mentor-protege to peer-collaborator, now extending beyond music into parallel philanthropic channels. Her gallon water jug, a constant companion in her hydration ritual, sat half-empty on the desk. She took a long drink, remembering her mother's constant reminders about water during Barbadian heatwaves. Some habits of survival never left, even when surrounded by luxury. The Paris rain tapped gently against the window of her suite at Le Maurice. January 2021. On the table before her, financial projections for Maison Fenty painted a sobering picture. The LVMH-backed luxury fashion house had failed to gain necessary traction. COVID had accelerated existing challenges: closed retail, cancelled fashion weeks, disrupted supply chains. Jaleel Weaver, her stylist and collaborator, sat across from her, silent as they both reviewed the numbers. 10 to 20 million in cumulative losses, Rihanna finally said, her voice steady. "The unit economics don't work." "We can pivot," Jaleel suggested. "Cut certain categories, focus on proven sellers." She shook her head. "Fashion isn't beauty. The capital intensity is different. The margin expectations are different. The consumer behavior is different." She closed the portfolio. "We need to pause Maison Fenty." The word pause hung in the air, deliberately chosen over close or shut down. A pause preserved optionality, maintained relationships, acknowledged current failure without foreclosing future possibility. "What about the team?" Jaleel asked. "We'll need to trim about 20% of staff," she said, the calculation already made. "But we'll preserve the core LVMH relationship for beauty. That's performing beyond projections." Later that evening, she video-called Bernard Arnault, LVMH's chairman. The French luxury titan had backed her vision for Maison Fenty. the first time the conglomerate had launched a fashion brand from scratch since Christian Lacroix in 1987. "Bernard," she began, "I've reviewed the projections. We need to make a change." The conversation unfolded with mutual respect, a businesswoman and businessman acknowledging market realities. She had learned early, emotion had no place in balance sheets. Fenty Beauty was thriving, Savage X Fenty was growing, but Maison Fenty required a different approach. Better to pause than to drain resources chasing unsustainable paths. "Kill your darlings if the unit economics don't work," she told him, a phrase she'd adopted from tech investors in her circle. "I'd rather concentrate capital where we've proven the model." Arnault agreed. The decision would be announced as a mutual pause, preserving both parties' dignity and future optionality. No burned bridges, no scorched earth, just capital discipline and strategic patience. After the call, she stood at the window watching Paris shimmer under rainfall. Her asset allocation was shifting toward high concentration in her Fenty ventures, nearly 80% of her wealth tied to beauty and Savage X equity. High illiquidity, high conviction. The portfolio reflected her psychology: bet on what you control, not on index funds you don't. The lessons of her father's addiction and her mother's financial discipline had crystallized into a business philosophy, ruthless about numbers, passionate about product, unwavering on inclusion, and willing to walk away when equations failed to balance. November 30th, 2021. Bridgetown's National Heroes Square glowed with ceremonial lights. Tonight, Barbados would become a republic, ending nearly 400 years of British monarchy. The air hung heavy with possibility and historical weight. Rihanna sat among dignitaries, her heart pounding with an emotion she hadn't anticipated. She had returned to witness Barbados claim full sovereignty, installing a Barbadian head of state to replace Queen Elizabeth II. The colonial chapter was closing. Prime Minister Mia Mottley approached the microphone. "On behalf of a grateful nation, but an even prouder people," she began, "we present to you the designee for National Hero of Barbados, Ambassador Robin Rihanna Fenty." A current of electricity seemed to pass through her body. The 11th National Hero of Barbados, the first since 1998. The title represented the highest honor her homeland could bestow. "May you continue to shine like a diamond," Prime Minister Mottley concluded, "and bring honor to your nation by your works, by your actions." Standing to accept, Rihanna felt the convergence of improbable trajectories. A girl from Westbury Road who once sold clothes at market stalls, now a billionaire entrepreneur being honored in the same city where she had begun with nothing but ambition and voice. Later that night, alone on her hotel balcony overlooking the Caribbean, she reflected on what the honor meant. Her wealth had reached unprecedented levels, yet she measured success differently now: impact over acclaim, sustainable models over short-term gains, governance over glory. Her phone chimed with a message from her team at Clara Lionel Foundation, confirming the $15 million commitment to the Caribbean Climate Smart Coalition. The funds would support climate resilience projects across the region's seawalls to protect coastal communities, renewable energy initiatives, disaster preparedness systems. The Caribbean faced disproportionate climate threats despite contributing minimally to global emissions. Another equation requiring balance. The criticism of billionaire philanthropy hadn't escaped her notice. Some called it vanity giving, PR stunts, drops in vast oceans of wealth. She had insisted on countering with substance, detailed impact reports, third-party evaluations, transparent 990 filings. By 2024, CLF would deploy approximately $50 million, a modest percentage of her net worth, but focused on outcomes per dollar rather than headlines per grant. The night air carried the scent of salt and frangipani. In her childhood, these same breezes had cooled Westbury Road after scorching days. Now they carried the weight of new responsibility: national hero, climate funder, pandemic responder, business architect. Her daily rhythm had acquired a disciplined predictability that balanced her creative impulses. Late-night work sessions in studios from LA to New York, dance-led fitness training that connected her to rhythm and body, the ever-present gallon water jug that had become a social media signature, a life of disciplined hedonism, pleasure and rigor intertwined, spectacle and spreadsheets in harmony. She thought of Fenty Skin's remarkable trajectory, profitable within 18 months, a pandemic-defying growth story. The inclusive first playbook that had revolutionized beauty had transferred successfully to skincare. Each product designed for all complexions, all genders, all identities. The business thesis remained unchanged. Underserved markets were not charity cases. They were untapped revenue streams waiting for respect and quality. Tomorrow she would return to America, to the empire she was building product by product, venture by venture. But tonight she belonged to Barbados, not as a celebrity or billionaire, but as a daughter of independence, a symbol of what post-colonial possibility could look like when talent met. Opportunity met unrelenting work. She lifted her water jug in a silent toast to her island home, now stepping fully into its sovereignty, just as she had stepped into hers. Different scales, same journey. The path from subject to author of nations, of businesses, of legacies, was never straight, never guaranteed, but always worth pursuing. In the distance, waves broke against the shore, a rhythm as familiar as her own heartbeat. Time would tell which ventures would flourish and which might require strategic pauses. But tonight, under Barbadian stars, that uncertainty felt less like risk and more like freedom. The freedom to build, to fail, to learn, and to build again. The morning light crept softly through the custom blinds of the Beverly Hills estate, casting gentle patterns across the modern concrete floors. Rihanna stirred before her alarm, a habit formed not from anxiety, but from the rhythm of motherhood that had reordered her life since May 2022. Her first son slept soundly in the nursery down the hall, monitored by a state-of-the-art system that felt both necessary and slightly absurd to someone who had grown up with far less. She moved quietly across the bedroom, careful not to wake ASAP Rocky, who had returned late from the studio. Their relationship had deepened through parenthood, finding new dimensions beyond their long friendship and creative partnership. In the bathroom mirror, she studied her reflection. The face that had graced countless magazine covers now carried a different kind of confidence, one earned through creation of a different sort. 2 sons, she whispered to herself, touching her abdomen where, 7 months earlier at the Super Bowl, she had revealed her second pregnancy to 118 million viewers with. Nothing more than a gentle touch. The world had exploded in response, but in that gesture had been something deeply personal. A declaration that her empire now had heirs, that legacy took forms beyond balance sheets and brand extensions. Her phone illuminated with the day's schedule. A video conference with the Fenty beauty team at 9, product approval meeting for Savage X at 11, and preliminary discussions about Fenty hair in the afternoon. The calendar that once accommodated 18-hour days now compressed those same commitments into windows that allowed her to be present for bath time, for first steps, for the quiet moments. That couldn't be delegated. Ms. Fenty, her assistant's voice came softly through the intercom. The reports from yesterday's sales figures are ready when you are. Thank you. I'll be down in 20. The house staff moved discreetly through the 7,600 square foot home, a machine of efficiency that enabled her to focus on what mattered. The chef had prepared her usual breakfast. Simple, nutritious, nothing that would compromise the discipline that remained part of her regimen. She ate at the kitchen island, scrolling through overnight emails, the quiet broken only by the distant sounds of her son waking. "Let me get him," she told the nanny who appeared in the doorway. These morning moments were non-negotiable, carved out even on the busiest days. Her son's smile as she entered his room realigned everything. In his eyes, she wasn't a billionaire or a global icon, just mother. The simplicity of it grounded her in ways that board meetings and balance sheets couldn't. "Good morning, my love," she whispered, lifting him from the crib. The September afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Fenty Beauty headquarters as Rihanna moved through the glass-walled conference room. Behind her, a presentation displayed preliminary sales figures for Fenty hair, launched just 3 months earlier in June 2024. The numbers exceeded even their ambitious projections. Textured, curly, and chemically treated hair products filling a gap in the market that seemed obvious in retrospect. We're seeing particularly strong engagement in the 25 to 45 demographic, the marketing director explained, advancing the slide. And retention rates are tracking 22% higher than industry average. Rihanna nodded, absorbing the information. The same thesis that had built Fenty Beauty into a $500 million enterprise was proving itself again. Serve the underserved, solve problems you've lived, create products with genuine utility rather than mere status. The playbook remained consistent even as the categories expanded. The shampoo formulation feedback, she asked. Overwhelmingly positive. The complaints are minimal and clustered around packaging, not product. Fix the packaging, she said simply. If that's the only barrier between good and exceptional, remove it. Her CFO cleared his throat, the slight discomfort in his posture signaling a different concern. The production scale-up will require additional capital if we want to meet projected demand by Q1 next year. And I'm wondering if you'd prefer to leverage existing cash reserves or consider bringing in additional investment. The valuation metrics would be quite favorable given these early results. Rihanna leaned back, considering. Her financial position had evolved dramatically since Forbes had calculated her net worth at $1.4 billion earlier that year. The majority remained tied to her approximately 50% stake in Fenty Beauty, valued conservatively at $1.1 billion, with significant holdings in Savage X Fenty, adding another $270 million. The music catalog that had launched her journey continued generating approximately $40 million annually in streaming and licensing revenue, a remarkable annuity for someone who hadn't released an album since 2016. Use the cash reserves, she decided. We maintain control that way. Dilution for speed isn't the right trade here. The room nodded in collective agreement. Her business instincts had proven remarkably sound, a fact that still surprised those who mistook her public persona for the sum of her capabilities. The cool exterior masked a voracious studier of markets, an obsessive reader of consumer behavior, and a strategist whose vision extended well beyond quarterly horizons. As the meeting concluded, she paused at the window overlooking Los Angeles. Below, billboards featuring Savage X models stretched along Sunset Boulevard. Diverse bodies presented not as novelty, but as self-evident reality. She remembered early meetings where executives had questioned whether inclusivity would scale as a business model. The answer now existed in spreadsheets and stock valuations. Her phone vibrated, a text from Rocky about their son's newest accomplishment. The empire could wait, some moments couldn't be rescheduled. The private dining room at Matsuhisa was dimly lit, affording the privacy that had become increasingly precious. Rihanna sat across from her longtime business partner and friend, reviewing the latest acquisition proposal. They're serious this time, he said, sliding the folder across the table. Full creative control, favorable revenue splits, complete ownership of masters going forward. She sipped her water, saying nothing for a long moment. The music industry had been courting her return for years, dangling increasingly generous terms for what would undoubtedly be a global event. Her last album had been 2016's Anti, an eternity in pop culture years, yet her cultural relevance had only grown. You know what's interesting, she finally said. 8 years ago this would have been everything I wanted. Now it feels peripheral. To what? To the larger picture. She gestured vaguely, encompassing something beyond the restaurant walls. Music gave me the platform, but it's not the end game anymore. It's a component, not the core. Her companion nodded, understanding the shift. The numbers told the story clearly enough. Fenty Beauty generating approximately $550 million in annual revenue across 50 countries. Savage X approaching $250 million. The recently launched Fenty hair already exceeding projections. Across all ventures, nearly 800 employees now operated under the Fenty umbrella. Music, while still significant, had become just one tributary feeding a much larger river. The Super Bowl changed things, she continued. referring to her February 2023 halftime performance that had drawn 118 million viewers. "I declined them for years on principle. The Kaepernick situation, the league's handling of racial justice issues. But principles and platforms aren't mutually exclusive. You can hold your ground and still use the stage when it serves the larger purpose." The performance had revealed her second pregnancy and driven unprecedented traffic to Fenty properties, web searches, sales, social engagement, all spiking dramatically in the days following. It had been a masterclass in leveraging a moment, transforming entertainment into commerce without compromising authenticity. So the album, Time, will happen when it needs to happen, not before. She closed the folder without looking at the numbers inside. "Right now, my focus is elsewhere." The elsewhere was clear enough. August 2023 had brought her second son with Rocky, deepening her commitment to building a life that balanced empire and family. The public narrative often framed this as effortless evolution, but the reality involved ruthless prioritization and an increasingly sophisticated delegation structure. "Speaking of focus," her companion said, changing subjects, "the Savage X IPO discussions are progressing. The banks are proposing a 2025 timeline with a potential $3 billion valuation." She considered this, mentally calculating her approximately 30% stake and what it would mean in liquidity. Public markets would bring scrutiny and quarterly pressure, but also validation and capital for expansion. The trade-offs were complex. "Let's see the governance structure proposals first," she decided. "I won't sacrifice control for cash. We've come too far to hand the steering wheel to quarterly expectations." The waiter appeared, discreet and efficient. The conversation paused as dishes arrived. Rihanna had long preferred these intimate business dinners to formal boardrooms. Something about breaking bread together revealed character in ways that PowerPoints couldn't. "Have you seen the latest Kehinde Wiley?" she asked, shifting to her growing interest in contemporary art. The Beverly Hills home, purchased in 2021 for $13.8 million, now housed a carefully curated collection, emphasizing artists who challenged conventional narratives. As dinner progressed, the conversation wandered between business strategy and personal philosophy, the boundaries between them increasingly porous in her worldview. Success had afforded her the luxury of integration, work as expression, commerce as impact, wealth as tool rather than trophy. The Century City condominium served as Rihanna's thinking space, a sanctuary purchased in 2014 that had witnessed the conception of her most transformative ventures. While the Beverly Hills home accommodated family life, this space remained dedicated to creation and contemplation. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching aircraft descend toward LAX. Among them would be NetJet's flights carrying executives and entertainers, the same service she preferred over the ostentation of a private aircraft. The calculus was simple. Ownership meant fixed costs and depreciation, access meant flexibility and efficiency. The same principle guided many of her decisions. Drivers instead of car collections, strategic real estate rather than multiple vacation properties. Behind her, spreadsheets displayed the current allocation of her wealth, approximately 80% in private equity, primarily her Fenty ventures, 10% in real estate, 5% in public equities, and 5% in cash reserves. The conservative structure reflected both her natural caution and her long-term horizon. Unlike peers who chased quick returns or status investments, her portfolio privileged control and compound growth. Her phone chimed with a calendar alert, a reminder of tomorrow's visit to Barbados. Despite the demands of empire building, she maintained close connections to her homeland, particularly after being named a national hero in 2021 as the nation became a republic. The relationship transcended sentiment. It represented continuity between origins and achievement. The intercom announced her legal team's arrival. They entered carrying thick binders containing the preliminary structure for Fenty Hair's international expansion. Regulatory requirements varied across markets. European Union cosmetic standards, Asian import protocols, Middle Eastern cultural considerations. Success required navigation of all these without compromising the brand's essential proposition. "Before we start," she said, gesturing them to the conference table, "I want to confirm that our animal testing prohibition remains absolute across all markets." The lead counsel nodded. "Yes, though it creates challenges in certain territories, we've developed workarounds that maintain compliance while honoring that commitment." This was non-negotiable, part of a framework of principles that defined her business practice since 2010. Similar red lines existed around ethical sourcing, labor standards, and environmental impact. These weren't marketing positions but operational imperatives, embedded in supplier contracts and quality control processes. As the meeting progressed, Rihanna demonstrated the dual-track thinking that had become her hallmark, simultaneously engaging with granular details while maintaining sight of strategic direction. She questioned specific clauses, suggested alternative approaches, and occasionally overruled recommendations based on instinct rather than data. "The Japan distribution model," she said, pointing to a particular slide, "feels too traditional for our brand position there. Let's explore the pop-up concept instead, create scarcity and experience rather than chasing saturation." Her team made notes, accustomed to these course corrections. The dynamic had evolved over years. They provided expertise and analysis. She provided vision and final judgment. The resulting decisions often defied conventional wisdom but proved prescient as markets evolved. After 2 hours, as the meeting concluded, her chief legal officer lingered. "There's one more thing," he said when the others had departed. "We've had another approach about political endorsement for the upcoming election cycle. Significant money offered for minimal commitment." She shook her head, not even asking the amount. "Same answer as always. I'll vote, I'll advocate for issues I care about, but I won't sell endorsements to candidates." This position had remained consistent despite occasionally supporting specific candidates. Biden in 2020, for instance, when personal conviction demanded it. The distinction was crucial: voice as citizen versus voice as brand. The former she guarded jealously, the latter she monetized strategically. As evening fell over Los Angeles, she gathered her materials. A car waited to take her home, where family matters would replace balance sheets and legal structures. The compartmentalization wasn't perfect, nothing human ever is, but she had crafted a rhythm that accommodated the multiple dimensions of her life with remarkable elegance. The skyline glittered as her driver navigated toward Beverly Hills. 800 employees across her companies, 152 million Instagram followers, products sold in 50-plus countries, and a valuation that had made her America's youngest self-made female billionaire. Yet in this quiet moment, watching the city lights, the metrics that occupied her thoughts were simpler. 2 sons, 1 partnership, countless possibilities still ahead. The car turned onto her street, approaching the gates that protected not just assets, but something far more valuable, the space to define success on her own terms. In that private kingdom, wealth functioned not as end but as means. Freedom to choose, power to build, capacity to evolve beyond others' definitions or expectations. "We're home, Miss Fenty," the driver announced softly. Home. The word contained multitudes. Rest and renewal, family and future, the quiet center from which empires could be dreamed and then, with patience and precision, brought into being. The amber glow of sunset painted the glass walls of her Malibu home in hues of gold and rose, not unlike the shade range that had revolutionized an industry. Rihanna stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the Pacific Ocean swallow the last light of day. Behind her, architectural plans for a Barbadian eco-resort were spread across an Italian marble table, the next expansion of an empire that had already transcended music. Her phone buzzed with a text from her LVMH partner, hair launch tracking 20% above projections. "Call tomorrow?" She smiled, but didn't reply immediately. Success no longer surprised her. It was the expected outcome of meticulous planning. The house was quiet, save for the distant sounds of her 2 young sons playing with their nanny in the nursery wing. Motherhood had reordered her priorities in ways both expected and unforeseen. Family first, then business, then art, a hierarchy that would have been incomprehensible to her younger self. "Mum?" Her assistant appeared in the doorway. "The Savage X team sent over the IPO prospectus draft for your review. And your lawyers would like to schedule a call about the trust structures. Put the IPO documents in my office. I'll review them tonight after the boys are asleep. Tell Moses and Laura I can do a call tomorrow at noon." Dynasty planning wasn't glamorous, but it was necessary. Creating structures that would outlive her, that was the true work of legacy. Not songs, not even beauty standards, but institutions that could evolve beyond their founder. As twilight deepened into evening, she walked through her home's gallery hall, lined with carefully selected art that told stories of the Caribbean diaspora, black excellence, and feminine power. The pieces were investments, yes, but also reminders of the journey. From a small house on Westbury Road to this cliffside compound with its views of endless ocean, the same ocean that connected Barbados to California, past to future. In her office, she settled into a custom ergonomic chair, designed after back pain from long flights between business outposts had become a recurring issue. The Savage X Fenty IPO documents were substantial, over 300 pages detailing a company valuation projected at $3 billion. 5 years earlier, the lingerie line had been just another ambitious idea. Now it was poised to enter public markets, cementing her transition from entertainer to institution builder. Her phone rang. The screen displayed J. "Perfect timing," she answered. "I was just looking at the Savage prospectus." "That's actually why I'm calling, Jay." Z's voice carried the weight of decades of industry wisdom. "I've been through this before. The roadshow is going to be intense. These Wall Street types, they'll try to reshape the narrative, pressure you to maximize short-term returns over long-term vision." She smiled at his concern. "I'm not worried about that. We've built this with the right foundations. The inclusion principle isn't just marketing, it's the business model. The numbers prove it." "I know, but public markets have their own logic. Once those quarterly reports start coming due, we've structured the voting shares to maintain control," she reminded him. "And the team understands the vision beauty for everyone, not just the few. That's not changing because some analyst thinks we could squeeze an extra point of margin by narrowing the product line." After hanging up, she opened her laptop to review the latest designs for Fenty hair. The line was targeted to reach $500 million in annual revenue by 2027, an ambitious but achievable goal if it followed beauty's trajectory. The products addressed textural diversity with the same comprehensive approach that had made her foundations industry-changing. The formula had proven itself. Identify an underserved market, create premium products that solved real problems, leverage distribution partnerships while maintaining equity control and use. Her platform not just as marketing but as proof of concept. She was both founder and customer, a authenticity no competitor could replicate. Her calendar alert chimed softly. Tomorrow's schedule appeared on screen, morning time with the boys. Then the legal call about trust structures, followed by a Fenty hair development meeting, and finally a preliminary discussion about returning to music when it was ready, a timeline she controlled, not the label, not the fans, not even the market. Later that night, after kissing her sleeping sons, she retreated to her study with a cup of chamomile tea. A documentary about Coco Chanel played on a wall-mounted screen. She watched with studied interest as the narrator described how Chanel had built a house that outlived its founder. "That's the real legacy," she murmured to herself, "not just changing culture while you're here, but building something that continues changing it when you're gone." Morning brought clarity and purpose. Her chief financial advisor arrived early, joining her on the terrace overlooking the ocean. Birds called from the carefully maintained native landscaping designed to minimize water usage, a small environmental commitment that mirrored larger ones through her foundation. "The Dynasty Trust documentation is nearly complete," he explained. sliding a folder across the glass table. South Dakota jurisdiction gives us the best protection and longevity. Your sons will be the primary beneficiaries, but we've built in provisions for charitable contributions to continue through the Clara Lionel Foundation in perpetuity. She nodded, scanning the documents. And the catalogue? We've structured it separately. No sale recommended at this time, streaming revenues continue to grow, and ownership gives you leverage in other negotiations. This was the unsexy side of empire building. The legal structures, tax considerations, and governance models that would protect and perpetuate what she had created. The public saw the glamour, the products, the performances. They didn't see these morning meetings about trust jurisdictions and succession planning. Her phone buzzed with a text from her creative director, eco-resort renderings updated with the sustainable water system. When can you review? The Barbados project remained unofficial, a whisper among insiders rather than a public commitment. But the planning continued. The concept combined luxury hospitality with climate resilience technology and local economic development. It would take years to realize, but like all her ventures, it would solve a problem she cared about while serving an underserved market. That afternoon, she sat in on a video call with the Fenty beauty team at LVMH. The scale of operations still occasionally amazed her. Hundreds of employees across continents, supply chains spanning multiple countries, distribution through thousands of Sephora stores, and digital channels. The 2025 forecast shows continued growth in Asia, the chief marketing officer explained. China's regulatory environment has stabilized, and our shade expansion for East Asian undertones is outperforming expectations. She listened attentively, asking pointed questions about inventory management and customer acquisition costs. These were not the concerns of a celebrity endorser, but of an owner-operator with meaningful equity at stake. As the call concluded, an executive asked about her potential return to music and its impact on marketing calendars. Music happens when the music is ready, she answered, her tone gentle but firm. The brands continue on their own trajectories. That's why we built them as institutions, not personality vehicles. After dinner with her children, a sacred time when emails went unanswered and calls went to voicemail, she retreated to her home studio. Unlike the pristine minimalism of the main house, this space was deliberately cluttered with instruments, recording equipment, and notebooks filled with fragmented lyrics and melodies. Her vocal coach arrived for their weekly session. Though no album release date had been announced, the work continued in private, away from the expectations and pressure that had once dominated her creative process. Motherhood had given her a new perspective on time. Some things couldn't and shouldn't be rushed. From the bridge, her coach instructed, and they resumed work on a ballad she'd been developing for months. The song explored themes of legacy and inheritance. What we build, what we leave behind, what transcends even wealth. Later, alone in the studio, she recorded voice notes for her business partners, observations on product development, marketing strategy, and organizational structure. Her management style had evolved with experience. Hire people smarter than yourself, establish clear vision, then give them space to execute while maintaining accountability through data. Her phone chimed with a calendar notification. Super Bowl performance, second-year anniversary. The 2023 halftime show had been a strategic masterstroke, not just a return to performing, but a platform that had generated tens of millions in immediate revenue lift for her businesses. The metrics still impressed: viewership in the hundreds of millions, social engagement in the billions, and product sales that had spiked 700% in the 48 hours following. Before retiring for the night, she opened her personal journal, not the business plans or the music notes, but the handwritten reflections she had maintained since childhood. The entry began, "If it all vanished tomorrow." She paused, considering the thought experiment she revisited periodically. If the empire disappeared, the beauty line, the lingerie company, the real estate portfolio, the investments, what would remain? Who would she be without the wealth and influence? She continued writing, Back to Barbados, open a restaurant by the beach, sing on weekends, I'd still be whole. This wasn't performative humility, but a grounding exercise. A reminder that the businesses were extensions of her vision, not her identity. The wealth was leverage to create change, not a measure of her worth. Morning brought a call from her lead philanthropic advisor. The Clara Lionel Foundation had awarded its 1,500th scholarship, surpassing its initial goals. Education remained the core focus, alongside emergency response capabilities that had been deployed during hurricanes and the pandemic. The board is recommending an expansion of the climate resilience program, her advisor explained. The data from the pilot projects in Barbados shows promising outcomes for coastal communities. She approved the expansion but requested more detailed impact metrics. Her approach to philanthropy mirrored her business philosophy, strategic, measurable, and built to scale beyond initial investment. Critics occasionally noted that her giving represented a relatively small percentage of her total wealth, but she focused on effectiveness rather than optics. Later that week, she met with a respected film director who'd approached her about a dramatic leading role. Not a musical biopic or cameo appearance, but a character-driven drama that would challenge perceptions and showcase range. Her acting ambitions had been temporarily shelved during early motherhood, but with her sons now toddlers, she was considering selective projects that aligned with her long-term vision. "I need to see how it fits with everything else," she told the director honestly. "The business commitments are substantial, and my children come first. But the right role, the right script, the right team, I'm open to it." As spring bloomed in California, the IPO preparations for Savage x Fenty intensified. Investment bankers in crisp suits and designer dresses populated her conference room, presenting market analyses and valuation models. She listened with the practiced attention of someone who had navigated these waters before, asking incisive questions about comparables and growth projections. When one banker suggested moderating the size range to improve margins, she didn't raise her voice or show irritation. She simply stated, "That contradicts our core principle. Inclusion isn't a marketing strategy, it's our business model. The numbers prove it works." The banker didn't argue further. Her track record spoke for itself. That evening, she hosted a small dinner for her core advisory team, the lawyers, accountants, creative directors, and strategists who helped manage her increasingly complex portfolio. The gathering was part strategy session, part family meal, a blend that characterized her leadership approach. Over dessert, conversation turned to the ultimate question: what did she want her legacy to be? "A house like Chanel," she said simply. "Something that outlives me, not just products, but a philosophy about beauty, inclusion, and business that changes how things are done." Her longtime lawyer nodded thoughtfully. "That requires careful governance planning. Succession structures, board composition, creative direction protocols. Chanel survived Coco's death because the institutions were stronger than any individual." "That's the work we're doing now," she agreed, building not just for the next quarter or the next year, but for the next generation. As her guests departed and household staff quietly cleared the dining room, she stood once more at the windows overlooking the darkened ocean. The empire she had built extended far beyond what could be seen from this vantage point: manufacturing facilities in multiple countries, retail partners across continents, digital platforms, reaching millions daily. Yet success had not changed her fundamental calculation. Ownership mattered more than quick paydays, building institutions mattered more than building fame, and family, the small boys, sleeping down the hall, mattered more than all of it. The path forward was clear. Scale Fenty Hair to its $500 million target. Navigate Savage X through its public offering while maintaining control. Return to music when the creative vision aligned with her standards, and perhaps realize the Barbados eco-resort dream that combined homeland pride with environmental innovation. Her phone buzzed one last time that evening, a message from her mother in Barbados. No business, no empire building, just family connection across the same ocean that had once seemed an unbridgeable divide between island origins and global ambitions. She smiled and typed a response. then set the phone aside. Tomorrow would bring another day of balancing motherhood with empire management. The Fenty legacy was still being written, but its foundations were secure built, not on celebrity but on solving real problems, serving underserved markets and maintaining ownership of what matters most.